Hello, guys and gals, and welcome. Welcome. So PTR starts tomorrow. PTR of Diablo 4, if you guys are unaware. It's a public test realm. That's what PTR stands for. And the PTR is basically going to be testing a bunch of new potential changes. Of course, these could be subject to change depending upon feedback. Feedback actually has managed to change quite a few features within public test realms before. So I would take what's in the public test realm with a grain of salt because you never know whether those features are actually going to make it into the real game. Probably one of the reasons why I'm late to these particular patch notes, but I figured doing it the day before probably better anyway. That way people can know what they're getting into and also know that the public test realm is coming tomorrow. If you're wondering when the public test realm is coming tomorrow, it's going to start on April 2nd, and I don't think they have a time here, but basically we're going to be able to hop on and we're going to test out a lot of these changes, and we're going to be encouraged to provide feedback, as much feedback as we can on these features so that they can refine them and make them better for the next season, which is season 4. Of course, most of these changes, and that's kind of the really weird thing because we haven't really gotten any season 4 information. You're like, what do you mean, Ginger? We've got all the season 4 information. They told us about tempering and greater affixes and master crafting and aspects in the Codex. Those aren't season 4 changes. Those are across the board changes. All right, we're talking about like what are they actually doing in season 4, right? So what are they doing? What's the the powers of season 4? Like what's the special story of season 4? Like they haven't told us any of that yet. This is across the board stuff. It even affects Eternal Realm, so it's important to keep that in mind. Let's see here. So we got a lot of stuff coming. They're making itemization changes. The itemization changes are reducing the number of affixes from 3 to 2. They told us in the dev chat, and basically normally the items would have 4 and they reduced to 3, and then the rares were apparently reduced to 2. And I'm actually really contentious on this particular point right here because I feel like they may have bricked basically all rare items in the game and made them useless, which is such a Diablo 3 change. In Diablo 3, if you were unaware, rare items were basically completely useless. They had no purpose whatsoever, except for maybe to prop you up in the early levels until you got your first legendaries. And then from that point on, they basically were always just simply trashed. You just took them straight to the blacksmith and you destroyed them, and they had absolutely no purpose whatsoever. And I'm afraid that this change right here may have actually created exactly that, that the rare items will now be basically garbage and nobody will want to use them anymore. And the reason for this is because if the legendaries have 3 and can potentially go to 5, but the rares have 2 and can only potentially go to 4, then that means that the rares will basically always be inferior to the legendaries. But of course, we're going to have to hop in and actually see how this is in public test realm because they didn't really elaborate very well on how effective the rares would be, which is unfortunate. They also took away a large number of the pose affixes, but then it was really weird because they were talking about the tempering system. And in the tempering system, they had a lot of those affixes that they took away inside the tempering system, which was a little weird. It's kind of odd to take them away only to add them back in another way. More relevant affixes, ranks of a single core skill. So like, for instance, they were talking specifically about gloves, and the gloves would have 4, basically, they would have like 4 plus the skills on them. And the 4 plus the skills that they would have on them would be absolutely silly. So you would basically have a pair of gloves that would have like +3 bone spear, +3 bone spirit, +3 reaper, or +3 blight, and it was absolutely silly. Like nobody in the world ever wanted those pair of gloves. It's not something that people are interested in. So some of that stuff has been kind of eliminated as options. Only sacred items in World Tier 3 and only ancestral items in World Tier 4. I mean, they said this before, but it didn't really hold true. There were still tons of monsters that would still drop sacred items in World Tier 4. And I don't really know if they're going to get it right this time, but sure. Affixes values are tuned up to be punchier. So even though they kind of like reduced the number of affixes, they increased the power of each affix. So the affixes are more powerful than they were before. In fact, this whole thing with the affixes and the items and the affixes being more potent and like the core skills and whatnot has basically led them to essentially mark all non what's the term? All pre 1.40 items will be marked as legacy is basically what they said. They will be legacy items because the things are changing to such a large degree that they don't want any of the legacy items to be compatible with the new systems. Yeah, you heard me right. So your legacy item is not going to be compatible with the tempering system, the master crafting system, or any of that other stuff. All the legacy items are essentially going to be marked as, they're just basically old hat equipment, and then the new stuff is going to take its place, which is a little freaking weird, to be perfectly honest, since we're only in season 4 for us to be marking out legacy equipment. They're also adding some new affixes: resource per second, resource on kill, lucky hit, apply vulnerable, life per hit, which is a pretty neat one, and basic skill ranks. Basic skill ranks was something that didn't really exist before. That's pretty neat. Legendary items drop from enemy 95 plus are always 925 item power. This would be something that I would say was a really good thing, except for the fact that they've basically made it so that 925 item power items are essentially garbage now. If you're unaware of how this works, because they added greater affixes into the game, because they've added the tempering system, the master crafting system, and so forth and so on. Basically, what happens is a plain 925 item power item is essentially garbage compared to like a double greater affix, fully upgraded, tempering master crafted item. And they won't even compare in power level. Like you'll be looking at a pretty huge difference between like a basic 925 item with no greater affixes and a double rolled greater affixes 925 item with like perfect tempering and master crafting and all that other crap. It's going to be a pretty massive difference between these two items. So while this is an interesting change, it also comes with a caveat of, well, yeah, you're getting the most powerful item in the game that was the most powerful item in the game previously, and then now you're going to get the less powerful item. But when you get into the higher tiers of like the pits and things like that, you'll start getting more greater affixes, and the more greater affixes that you get, you're going to be able to replace these regular plain 925 items relatively quickly. Gems are simpler, more useful. This is a really vague thing. They were talking about this during the dev chat, and I really kind of need to see them. They said that some of them have core stats. That was basically the only thing that they gave us. But they also talked about taking away some of the conditional bonuses and simplifying them, but I haven't really seen them yet. Hopefully they're in the patch notes. I'm actually half tempted to just skip over most of this and go straight to the patch notes. They talked about the tempering system, which is basically a straight-up rip-off of the last Epoch system. It has the same temper durability. You can add 2 affixes to the item. You can brick the item if you run out of durability and you don't get what you're looking for, which does make the item essentially unusable at that point. Like, for instance, if there's some very specific affix that you have to have on the item and you don't get it, then you're not really going to be able to use it. So it's going to basically brick the item and you'll have to find another one. And this is going to come at a premium when you start dealing with the greater affixes that are actually hard to find. So basically, as you're going along and you're playing in some of the higher tier content, you're going to find items that have these greater affixes. And here's the greater affixes right here. And they're going to be denoted by like a little 2 on the edge as well. And the 2 that's on the edge is basically going to indicate whether or not it has this greater affix on it. And you can have more than one greater affix as well. And so when you go to find your equipment, you're going to have to find pieces of equipment, not only that have the right stats, not only that have a greater affix, but have multiple greater affixes and in the right condition to actually be utilized in the tempering system. and then you're going to add the 2 remaining affixes onto this item, which is then going to be pretty much the most powerful item in the game. So you're basically going to be looking for these greater affix items. Obviously, you want them to be 925. I don't even know if greater affixes can roll on items below 925. But once you have these greater affixes, they're literally 1.5 times multipliers on the affix's maximum roll, which essentially means that they're going to be a lot more powerful than a regular item, especially when you consider in the fact that there are things that allow you to multiply additive bonuses by adding in those additive bonuses even further. Like, for instance, on the rogue, there's one particular additive bonus which, when you stack vulnerable additive, as an example, becomes a multiplier. So if you have a 1.5 times multiplier on a greater affix for vulnerable damage, and then you were to add in the tempering system, which allows you to add in the affixes that you want, and then on top of that, you go through the master crafting system, which is a whole other system, which the master crafting system, if they have it in here, they don't have the master crafting system in here. The master crafting system also allows you to get a huge bonus on one particular aspect or one particular affix, and you can actually stack all of the upgrades on one specific affix. So, for instance, in the case of a rogue who has a vulnerable multiplier or a vulnerable additive which turns into a multiplier, you can potentially take that vulnerable additive, get the 1.5 times, which is an initial multiplier, and then when you mastercraft it, if you can manage it, which I do believe, according to some people, you can actually redo the mastercrafting over and over again until you get exactly what you're looking for, and you can stack all 3 of the multipliers from the mastercrafting on top of the vulnerable, getting a huge vulnerable percentage additive, which will, of course, also increase your multiplicative bonus and give you a massive amounts of damage. This is what I'm talking about when I say that the difference between your plain 925s and your like greater affix rolled 925s is going to be pretty massive, because that 1.5 times multiplier that comes from the greater affixes and then combined with the additional multipliers that come from the master working, there just won't be much comparison between a plain 925 and a greater affix 925. The power level between them is going to be like in excess, I would say, of probably something like 40% times multiplier, maybe even higher. I'm not exactly 100% sure, because there's multiple greater affixes, and some classes, like for instance the Druid, can actually have 2 additive multipliers. So you could potentially have 2 additive bonuses on your weapon, and those could be 1.5 times, and then you could also masterwork the item, increasing those multipliers, those additives as well, which could then therefore increase the multiplicatives. So it gets kind of crazy in how you could potentially customize a weapon to make it give you the most damage possible. I'm really interested in the patch notes, though. But let's go over some of this stuff briefly that they're going to be adding into the game. Besides greater affixes, there's also going to be the Codex of Power update, which is going to allow all of the Codex entries, including, non-Codex entries like the regular aspect entries, to go into the Codex. Now, the way that they've explained that this is going to work is basically when you find a Codex entry, or rather, when you find an aspect and you destroy the item and it turns into an aspect, it immediately goes into your codex, and it's going to take the place of whatever one you had, and they basically have different ranks of the items, and you're basically going to be constantly looking for that perfect rank. According to what they're saying, once you get the perfect rank, you can basically just put it on the item forever. But they are definitely making it a little bit more difficult. So they talked about during the dev chat that basically there was going to be a absolute like easiest highest rank to get, and that was like the rank that we have right now. So as an example, Edge Masters goes to say 20%, right? And then you can put it on Amulet for what, 30%, and a weapon for 40. Well, they talked about basically adding in an additional 5 ranks, which would be like up to 25%, but then making that 25% very difficult to obtain. So you're still going to be able to obtain like the original 20%, which is what we all were using before, but then they're going to make those additional like couple ranks to get like the perfect aspect much more difficult to obtain. But they're not actually going to like reduce the overall effectiveness of what we had before. They're just going to add a couple more ranks on top that make it more difficult to get to that level. They also talked about adding in HellTide, so we'll be able to test out that during the PTR, which is the HellTide counter, which basically allows you to build up sort of like a frenzy meter, and basically as soon as the frenzy meter fills up, you get a whole bunch of monsters all attacking you at once, some elites, little bosses and things like that that are going to come and try and smack you booty cheeks, and it's interesting. The only thing that I'm worried about with this is that while this does sound interesting and it sounds like it's a pretty cool change, most of this stuff up here, like the greater affixes, the tempering, and the just in general, like the power level increase or the power creep or whatever you're going to want to call it, it's going to make HellTide probably the easiest content in the game. And that while it's really cool that they're adding in this feature to, like increase the difficulty or increase the, I'm not really sure difficulty is the right word, like fun factor of HellTides. I feel like all the stuff that they've added previously, like the masterworking, the tempering, the greater affixes, and whatnot, are going to make HellTides not. I don't even think trivial is the word anymore, because once you get into some of those higher tiers that they're planning on putting into the game, base content in the open world is going to feel absolutely pathetic. I'm not really sure what they're going to do about that, but I guess while you're leveling up at least, and while you're having fun, getting to that point, the HellTides will be super fun up until the point where you start to get so overpowered that you're like walking through them and things are disintegrating around you, like Kenpachi in Bleach, where like he was laughing at Ichigo because Ichigo couldn't even scratch him because his aura was so strong that literally lesser freaking people would just like disintegrate upon touching his aura. I mean, that's basically what it's going to feel like in the HellTide once you get all your equipment upgraded. Accursed Ritual. The Baneful Hearts can primarily be earned through opening tortured gift chests and can be used at the ritual locations. Scene of shocking gore, the Accursed Ritual is an ultimate testament to the disturbing lengths the manic cultists would go to appease their dark wishes. It is here where you can begin the Accursed Ritual. Deposit 3 Baneful Hearts to begin the ritual, and you will be swarmed with a dense demonic ambush. Other players within your zone will be alerted that the ritual has begun, and the ambush will climax with the arrival of the Blood Maiden, an immensely powerful demonic creature. Basically, what this is, if you guys are unaware, is during the vampiric season, they basically had these pretty cool things that you could do where you could collect blood, and then you would take the blood to the center of the thing, and then you would put the blood in, and it would spawn a whole bunch of monsters. And everybody had a great fun at doing these vampiric blood events. And essentially, a lot of people, when they took away the vampiric events, were like, well, we understand that it's not staying because the seasonal theme was the vampiric events. And then obviously you're taking away the vampiric events. It's like, but why not take the thing that we liked from the vampiric events and put it into the game? And that's basically what this is. They basically took the vampiric event, that really cool event that was in the vampiric zone, where you could collect the blood and then put the blood in the thing and then spawn a bunch of monsters, and then everybody gets to fight because you get to like sit there at the vampiric event and you get to have fun just murdering everything and collecting loot and whatnot, right? So basically this is what this is for the HellTide, and that's definitely a good addition. It's a thing that a lot of people liked. World Tier 1 and 2 adjustments to get players into the thick of HellTides. Earlier journey adjustments to make the HellTides more fun and rewarding. All tortured gifts are mystery chests. No roaming bosses or ambient meteors. They took away the meteors. I like the roaming bosses, though. But I'm kind of glad they took away the meteors. I didn't really like those. And the number of times that I died while climbing a ladder or something stupid like that because the meteor landed on the ladder while I was climbing the ladder and I had no way out. Was a little stupid, but I like the roaming bosses. That's sad. Less monster density overall compared to World Tier 3 and World Tier 4, but I guess this is just for World Tier 1 and 2. So the meteors and the bosses are only gone for World Tier 1 and 2. I guess that makes sense. And then less monster density overall compared to 3 and 4. I mean, to be honest with you, World 1 and 2 is already pretty easy. The main issue with this, so they say rewarding. The main issue with World Tier 1 and 2 is that you don't get sacred and ancestral items, and that's why everybody rushes out of World Tier 1 and 2 as quickly as possible, because they know that farming in World Tier 1 and 2 just is useless for them in general. And so there's no real reason to stay in World Tier 1 and 2 when you can go to 3 and get the beautiful sacred items, or you can go to 4 and get the beautiful ancestral items, because people aren't stupid. You guys aren't stupid. No, nobody that plays games really is that dumb. Like they realize pretty quickly that the equipment that you're getting in World Tier 1 and 2 is useless end game. Like it has no purpose end game. Like yes, you can collect some aspects and you can maybe destroy those aspects and add them into your codex, but for the most part, pretty much everything you do in World Tier 1 and 2, with the exception of codex entries and maybe collecting resources, is relatively useless once you get into World Tier 3 and 4 and you realize that there's literally a whole nother tier of equipment, which is way better than the equipment that you had before. And that happens twice until eventually you hit World Tier 4 and you get your ancestral equipment. But now it happens 3 times, because now it's going to happen once when you hit World Tier 3 when you get Sacred, once when you hit World Tier 4 and you get your ancestral, and then it's going to happen again when you start finding those greater affixes and you realize that the greater affixes are way better than the equipment that you had on that's ancestral. So the tier now is basically normal, sacred, ancestral, and ancestral with greater affixes, which is basically now the new tier. Pit of Artificers. They might as well just rename this to Greater Rifts. It even has the exact same animation as Greater Rifts. Basically, they're going to be adding in a Greater Rift system, almost identical to Diablo 3's. And it's going to have, what is it, 250, I think is what they said, 250 tiers. And it's going to go up essentially pretty much forever. A lot of the stuff is going to be tied into this. They talked about how there was specific crafting ingredients that you needed to farm in these. Things that were going to help you with your master crafting, with your tempering, etc. And you're going to need to farm these to be able to do those tasks. And personally, this is not something that I'm really excited for. I think that the initial reception of the pit will be good. And you might be surprised to hear me say that, but the initial reception of Greater Rifts was good. When Greater Rifts first came out in Diablo 3, it was pretty. People were pretty excited about it. But I think once you get into the Greater Rifts and you realize what they are, it's just going to get really boring, and you're probably not going to like them very much after a while. After the initial impact of them wears off, and you realize that it's just farming the same exact dungeon basically forever, with no real end, and the only thing you can do is slightly increase the difficulty to go a little bit further than you could before. I think you're going to realize relatively quickly that it's not as fun as it looks, and hopefully, if I'm being perfectly honest, hopefully not a lot of the game is tied into this that requires you to do the pit, because I would rather not have to farm the pit for endless hours like I did in Diablo 3. I can't believe how many greater rifts I did in Diablo 3, to the point where literally that was all I ever did. And all the other content in the game, and it's actually kind of sad when you think about it like this, but all the other content in Diablo 3 basically became meaningless, because the only content that mattered at the end game was pits and the greater rift, or sorry, the rifts and the greater rifts. That was the only content that mattered. And I'm hoping that that's not the case. They also are adding in Andariel, which is pretty cool. Andariel is supposed to have the same drop table as Duriel, according to the system. And I mean, I kind of wish they had made her own drop table, but it is interesting to have another boss to farm other than Duriel. Basically, Duriel's mats are going to come from the dungeon bosses that we currently do not really use all that much. So, for instance, before you would get your summoning mats from doing what was it? I'm blanking right now. Freaking Tentacle Boy from season 1 and and Grigore. But this one, you're going to get the mats from Beast in the Ice and Lord Zir. So Beast in the Ice and Lord Zir are going to become monsters that you're going to farm on a regular basis in this upcoming patch, which basically makes it so that you're going to get access to Andariel, and then of course Andariel is going to be another potential farming spot for the Uber Uniques. They did show a little bit of stuff with these, but they didn't really show that much footage in the thing. Now they also talked about Tormented Echoes, basically being like the bosses that we fought before, but you'll basically get to farm the mats for these tormented versions of the bosses, and they're going to be level 200 bosses. And essentially, from what I understand, all of these bosses will be the ones that we fought before. So you'll have like Lord Zir in there, probably Beast in the Ice at level 200. It's most likely going to be all of them, and they're going to be basically much harder versions of themselves. They do have a pretty good reward, though, for completing them, which is the Resplendent Sparks. So in the previous patches, they basically made it so that you could potentially create your own Uber Unique items. And the number of Resplendent Sparks that's required for that is 4. So basically what this is going to allow you to do is it's going to allow you to create a Resplendent, you use those Resplendent Sparks to create an Uber Unique, but with a caveat. They talked about this, and I could be wrong, but let me just make sure that I say this. They talked about the Uber Unique items basically getting greater affix rolls, and that potentially you could be looking at trying to get, like, say, for instance, I don't know, a Shaco with a 1.5 times roll on the health or something like that, or the damage reduction. I don't remember exactly. I'd have to go back in the stream, but I'm pretty sure that they said that even the Uber Uniques could roll with greater affix rolls. So, and that essentially, when you are doing this new feature, which is creating them, you can create them also with the greater affix rolls. And this is less useful than you might think. Yes, you'll be able to get Uber Unique, no problem, if you can clear these. So you'll be able to get an Uber Unique. But there's no guarantee it's going to be one that rolls with the greater affix rolls that you need on the Uber Unique to make the Uber Unique like the most powerful version of itself or whatever. So much for the old, like when the patch came out, the Uber Uniques would always drop at 925 and they would always drop at maximum rolls. Well, that kind of is going the way of the dinosaur, is that, yeah, they're still rolling at maximum rolls, but you can also potentially get them with greater affix rolls as well. So there's going to be a little bit of a annoyance there in trying to farm Uber Unique that has the greater affix roll that you're looking for, which does go on a random affix as far as I understand, and then there's 4 affixes on the items. They do have some features that are offered for testing, so we're going to be able to instantly boost a character to level 100. 100 million gold will be given to you upon boosting, 1,000 obols, 2 random sets of ancestral gear at 920 power. I'm not sure why 920 power. Fully unlocked Paragon glyphs, up to 10 tempering manuals. Basically, they're going to give us everything we need to actually test everything out, including the Fog of War completed. They also have legendary drop rates doubled so we can test easier, so you can find more legendary items, obviously, and get more equipment. How do you install the PTR? So installing the PTR is something as simple as going to your launcher, from what I understand. And if you're on PC, I don't think this is a something that's active for consoles. I'm pretty sure it's not. But generally what you do is you have to go here and you have to choose this to change it to the public test realm client. So when it becomes active, let's see, this becomes a play button when it is ready. Let's see here, selector. So right above the play button, there's a game version dropdown. This is the game version dropdown right here. And you're going to choose public test realm from the game option. And that's going to essentially give you the ability to choose the public test realm and install it and, of course, play it. Apparently, there's tons and tons of patch notes, so get ready for this. We're going to go over these patch notes together. We're going to talk about the changes. They did not give us patch notes during the thing, but they posted these about 3 days ago, and I'm just super late. I will give some warnings, though, in advance, is that, like I said, these are not concrete changes. Keep in mind that when public test realms are going live, the majority of the time public test realms go live with the understanding that they want player feedback and that they want you to test things and find bugs, blah, yada, yada. And so if you have a feature in here or you see a feature in here that you don't like, it's not set in stone. These things can be changed with enough public feedback or outcry or whatever you want to call it to the contrary. So it doesn't take that much effort, honestly. You just need to go on the forums and provide feedback for specific things and get a bunch of people to comment with you. And before too long, you'll see a lot of these things change. So as we go over these, do take it with a grain of salt, so to speak, because it's not set in stone. I've seen many PTRs start with changes that looked absolutely horrible and end with changes that looked much better. All right, so first off, new character highlights. We have an option to highlight NPCs, characters, enemies found within the sanctuary to make them far easier to distinguish against different environments. Standard highlight sets the in-game lighting to emphasize the dark and gritty world of Sanctuary as intended. Well, that's interesting. Additional highlights greatly increases the contrast for characters within the world. In-game options can be used to modify the intensity as well as the colors. So they're having multiple different color sets that you can choose from. New items. Tyrell's Might. They showed this one on the stream, and I think I have pictures of these. Hold on, let me pull up my my Discord real quick because I do have pictures of these, and I can pull them up for you guys to see instead of just reading off the silly writing that they currently have here. All right, so here's Tyrell's Might. Let's bring this one up first. So this is the Tyrell's Might that they added into the game, and I don't know if this one is going to change, but it does have 10% damage reduction on it. And it also basically has the Artillery Shrine attached to it. Now, it's really kind of interesting because they use this as an example of a nerf that they have coming, and they said it plain as day. It wasn't something that they were trying to hide. They said this 10% damage reduction, because a lot of people were like, 10% damage reduction? That's not a lot. Like, you can get like 20% from such and such, and you can get like, 25% from this. And they basically said that a lot of the damage reduction in the game is going away. Which is a nerf basically to all players. And your character is going to be a lot squishier than normal. And they basically said that this 10% damage reduction that's on this armor actually represents one of the rare damage reduction modifiers that you're going to have access to, because they're basically taking away most damage reduction from most items, or limiting it in a lot of ways. They also are taking away damage reduction specifically from classes. Like one of them in particular was the Barbarian that had I think it was like a 10% flat passive damage reduction that was added during, I think it was like season 0, and they're taking that away too. They're also reducing a lot of the damage reduction across the board on skills and things like that. So I would expect your characters to be a lot less tanky in season 4 than they were in season 3. And when I say a lot less tanky, I mean a lot less tanky, because if this represents what we can consider to be a lot of damage reduction, when we were looking at like 25% before, I think we might be dying a lot in season 4. So look forward to that. Yen's Blessing, they did not show or did they show a picture of Yen's Blessing? Let me see. No, they didn't show a picture of Yen's Blessing. The unique boots. This is casting a skill has a 20 to 30% chance to cast a non-mobility, non-ultimate skill that is currently on cooldown. This effect can only occur once every 12 seconds. Non-mobility, non-ultimate skill. That sounds pretty crazy. Huh. Legendary aspects. Aspect of the Frosty Strides while below 45 to 60% life. Evade freezes close enemies for cold damage and applies vulnerable to them. Aspect of the concussive strikes. Lucky hit damaging an enemy has up to a 20% chance to daze them for 2 seconds, and you deal 5 to 20% damage to dazed enemies. Barbarian unique item, Ariat's Bearing, unique pants. Ancients you summoned are empowered. Korlik creates an earthquake that deals physical damage over 4 seconds when he leaps. Talik leaves behind dust devils that deal damage while he whirlwinds, and Maddock ignites the ground, burning enemies for additional 4 seconds when he upheaves the ground. So this is specifically to the Ancients ability that you can summon, which basically gives the Ancients their own special effects. They have talked about increasing these, by the way. So, like the Earthquake, the Dust Devils, and the Burning. They talked about how it's going to scale with the item power of your weapons now. So, I mean, it's actually kind of interesting. This is basically making it so that you can scale that damage, but it's also making it so that you can have another reason to use your Ancients and summon them. There's tons of different things that affect the Ancients, by the way. Twin Strikes, unique gloves. After casting double swing 4 times, your next double swing will hit 2 additional times, each dealing 10 to 25% increased damage. That sounds pretty good, actually. The double swing will hit an additional 2 times. So every time you cast it 4 times, you get 2 additional hits, which basically gives you what? An additional... If we got to use our fraction math, so we gotta simplify. So 4 goes down to 2, and 2 goes down to 1, which means it's a 2/1 equation. So 2/1 equation is a 50% damage bonus. So for every 4 times you get 2 additional hits that deal 10 to 25% damage. So the 10 to 25%, if you have the 25% increased for each hit, that means you get a 50% total bonus. So you're looking at essentially like a 60% increase in damage from these using double swing. That sounds pretty neat. Legendary aspects of the Fierce Winds. Your shout skills create 5 dust devils that deal damage to enemies along their path. They're kind of like going hard with this dust devil stuff and different effects that are scaling based off of your weapons now, because they've fixed them, so to speak. I guess we'll see how fixed they are, but essentially they're going hard with it. Your Dust Devils are 5 to 15% bigger and deal 1% increased damage for each 1% increased. Their size is increased. And I know Dust Devils are from D3. Druid unique items. Earthbreaker unique ring. Landslide causes the ground to erupt in tectonic spikes, which continue to deal 0.6 to 0.9 damage over 2 seconds. Casting landslide in this area has a 20 to 30% to cause an additional landslide pillars to spawn within. It'd be interesting to see how that combines together with the aspect that allows you to utilize landslide around your poison creeper. It'd be interesting. Poison creeper, landslide with the tectonic spikes. Could be neat. Wild Heart Hunger unique boots. When you shapeshift into a werewolf or werebear, you gain Wild Heart for 5 seconds. Wild Heart grants you 1 to 1.5% increased damage with shapeshifting skills every 2 seconds, stacking 20 times. Legendary aspects. Aspect of the Fevered Mauling. When you hit at least one enemy with Maul, increase its attack speed by 1 to 2%, and you gain 1 to 3% damage reduction for 5 seconds, stacking up to 5 times. That basically turns Maul into Frenzy, from what I can understand, because Frenzy gains attack speed as you build stacks, and it gains damage reduction as you build stacks. So they've basically just turned the Maul skill into a Frenzy skill. Necromancer, Ebon Piercer, unique amulet. Blight also shoots 4 smaller projectiles that pierce enemies and deal shadow damage over 3 seconds. Cure's Embrace, unique gloves. Blood Surge consumes corpses to cause mini novas. Dealing damage. Damage is increased by 10% per target drained by the initial cast, up to 50%. Damage is also increased by 20% for each corpse consumed. Hmm. This consumes corpses to cause mini novas. I mean, it's interesting, but it also, a lot of necromancers are using those corpses for other things. It could be interesting to see how this combines together with the resource generator, which allows you to gain resource for consuming corpses. So then maybe when you're using Blood Surge, you're also consuming corpses, which then regenerates essence, which could potentially make this an infinite loop. I guess we'll see. Legendary aspects, apophic. About how the hell do you pronounce that? Aphotic, aphotic aspect. Skeletal priests empower your skeletal warriors' attacks to deal shadow damage and have a 5 to 15% chance to stun enemies for 1.5 seconds. That's pretty interesting. Rogue, unique weapons or unique items. Scoundrel's Kiss, unique ring. Rapid fire nail lobs, exploding arrows that deal 15 to 25% increased damage. Lobs, exploding arrows. That sounds kind of cool, actually. Saboteur's Signet, unique ring. Casting Flurry has a 15 to 30% chance to release stun grenades that deal physical damage and stun enemies for 1 second. Your grenade skills have 5% lucky hit chance. They were talking about Flurry a lot. They basically nobody was using Flurry on the Rogue, and that Flurry had literally been like so neglected that apparently they had decided to make Flurry the target of a lot of buffs. So I don't know if they're going to succeed, but do keep an eye out for Flurry because they have changed a lot of things with Flurry in an attempt to make Flurry into a skill that people are interested in using. And like I said, I don't know whether they succeed or not, but they're going to do it regardless. Legendary aspects, aspect of the high velocity. Barrage arrows now pierce through one enemy. Barrage has a 10 to 20% increased attack speed. Sorcerer unique items. So I have that one here too. This is the Fractured Winter Glass. I'm actually pretty excited about this one. This is the one that basically makes it so that Frozen Orb it has a random chance to spawn from your conjurations. So whenever you're casting Frozen Orb, you essentially have a 50% chance to spawn a random conjuration when it explodes. And then also Lucky Hit, your conjurations have up to a 94% chance or 100% chance here to launch a Frozen Orb at nearby enemies. So basically, this is a Frozen Orb conjuration build item, which essentially allows you to stack Frozen Orbs and get like tons and tons of Frozen Orbs spawning at the same time. I've played around with Frozen Orb before on a Sorceress, and I actually really liked it. It does kind of lack in single target damage, which is unfortunate, but that's just the way the cookie crumbles sometimes. Um, I'm interested. I kind of want to make a Frozen Orb Sorceress. Might be the first time you see me start as a Sorceress for a season. Flame Weaver, unique gloves. Casting Firebolt through your firewall causes it to split into 4 bolts, each dealing 80 to 100% more damage. That's interesting. So that's basically a basic build, a Firebolt basic build item. I could totally see making an entire basic build around that. Run Edge Masters, run your basic skills, get everything set up for fire damage, run your firewall, of course, so that you can split your bolts, and then you get your fire bolts splitting into 4 bolts. Run those really nice new aspects like they brought back the vampiric one that gives you the multiplier for basic skills, and then they've got that new one now, which also gives you the basic skill damage. Honestly, it sounds pretty good. You could totally make a basic firebolt build sorceress from that. Legendary aspects of the Tenuous Destruction. Deals 25 to 40% increased damage while you have no defensive skills on your action bar. Oh, that's going to be a tempty one for a lot of characters. I know most sorceresses have probably like anywhere between 2 to 4 defensive skills on their bar at any given time. I feel like the defensive skills are one of the main things that sorceresses use, but being offered a 40%, I'm assuming multiplier, offering a 40% multiplier for not having any defensive skills on your bar is going to be tempting for those people who like to build those glass cannon builds. Could be an interesting one. Flamethrower's aspect, Incinerate splits into 3 beams, each dealing 70 to 85% of normal damage. So they're trying to beef up Incinerate. Three Incinerate beams definitely does sound kind of crazy. Balance updates, unique items. So they talked about in the dev chat, so let me just say this before we even get started. They nerfed Banished Lord's talismans. And they also nerfed bolts. And rightfully so, honestly, because they were pretty OP. Updated the visuals and sounds indicate that your next core skill will overpower. Critical strike overpower damage reduced from 80 to 120 to 20 to 60%. Basically a 50% nerf on the overpower multiplier. Resources needed to guarantee overpower reduced from 300 to 275. To Bolt's Will, damage increased while unstoppable reduced from 20 to 40 to 10 to 20%. Again, another 50% nerf there. And damage increase persists for 1 second longer after being unstoppable. Legendary aspects, disobedience. Armor stacks no longer fall off independently. I've been talking about this for a very long time, that disobedience was basically useless because of the way that the armor stacks fell off independently, and essentially made disobedience into possibly the worst aspect in the game. Everybody was always riding that disobedience penis. Little awkward pause there. And quite honestly, I never really understood it because you would often end up in very awkward situations where your stacks would fall off almost all at the same time because they were generated at the same time, and then a monster would hit you right as the stacks fell off, and then you would die, and you would wonder why you died. You would be like, why did I die? I've got disobedience. This doesn't make any sense. Why am I dying? Well, the answer to why you were dying was because the way that the stacks actually worked was that you would build the stacks and then they would fall off immediately as the stacks would deteriorate, and there was no way to refresh them, and you couldn't actually build more stacks while stacks were currently active. So let's say you were I don't know, let's say a big hulking druid bear, and you ran in there and you smash your hands down and you've got 40 stacks instantly, right? 40 instant stacks. I'm amazing. Look at me. I built my 40 stacks. And then your 40 stacks would all fall off at the exact same moment, and you might not be ready to regenerate all 40 stacks at the exact time that they would fall off, and then a boss would come on and he would go, and you would fall straight to the dirt, and you would wonder why it would happen. And the reason why that would happen was because of the way that the stacks generated and fell off was actually notoriously dangerous. So I never would rely on disobedience like a lot of other people would. And so basically now they're going to actually refresh or reset at the same time, which basically means that now it's going to be a little less horrible, but I'm not really sure. We're going to have to take a look at this. So if they can actually refresh, which they were not possible before, then you should be looking at the ability to maintain the disobedience stacks with basically 100% efficiency. The only real problem with disobedience now is that you still have to build the stacks before you get the damage reduction, so you're going to have to be that big hulking bear who goes in and builds all 40 stacks in one hit. Otherwise, you might end up in a position where while you're trying to build your stacks, you end up, in trouble. Armor gain changed to 25 to 40%. It was 55% before, right? So is that a nerf? I'm telling you, they're making everybody weaker, which is not exactly a good thing. Somebody earlier in chat was like, it's a good thing they're making it weaker. What did he say? He said less DR means slowing down the damage a little, which sounds cool. It's not cool because you're going to get one shot a lot, just like before. Remember in season 0 and season 1 where your characters just would get randomly one shot and you just had no clue what the hell was going on, and you just ended up on the floor all the time for no reason, and like you would stack up the armor, you would stack up the DR, you would stack up everything you could, and you just still ended up getting one shot for no reason. Like, we're kind of returning to that, which is basically you're just going to get one shot for no reason again, which is not a good thing. That was a Diablo 3 thing, by the way. In Diablo 3, you would walk into a zone, and the monsters would just, like, lay you down to the dirt. And you're like, oh, I don't belong here. They love to do that in Diablo 3, where basically you would just walk into a zone and get one shot by everything. Assimilation. Previous, you have 8% damage reduction versus enemies by damage over time effects. When you dodge, you gain 5% of your primary resource. Now you get 8% increased dodge chance when you dodge, fortify for 520% of your maximum life. Oh, they gave the rogues a way to fortify. So, interesting. You're not wrong, Dragon. When Juggernaut came out, Juggernaut basically completely displaced Disobedience, in my opinion. because Juggernaut doesn't require stacks, and it also is a static amount that's added. It's also not a percentage added. It's just a flat bonus added, which is even better because it also gets affected by some of your bonuses, which basically made Disobedience just the redheaded stepchild of the family, because Juggernaut was way better than Disobedience. I never ran Disobedience, but all my characters when Juggernaut came out was running Juggernaut because Juggernaut would cap out their armor like that. Retribution of Retribution. Chance to stun enemies increased from 8 to 10% and now increases the damage to stun to knock down enemies. This kind of stuff is never going to work because it doesn't apply to bosses and it doesn't apply to a lot of monsters. The unfortunate truth of the matter when it comes to these crowd control damage bonuses is that they're useless because when you get to those monsters, those bosses and things like that where this stuff doesn't apply, it makes it so that this is basically a wasted aspect slot. And they need to figure this out already. They need to find a way to allow you to actually apply this kind of damage to bosses, or they need to move away from this kind of stuff because all this really does is it just makes it's like a trap basically for new characters, for people who don't understand how this stuff works, because they'll look at this and they'll build a character around stuns and knockdowns and they'll do great versus trash mobs, they'll do great versus like regular crap in a dungeon, but then they get to the boss and none of these modifiers are going to help them versus the boss, and then they struggle versus the bosses and they end up getting killed or they have to call in their friends to come help them, and it's because they're built toward this kind of bullcrap. And as long as the devs keep adding this kind of bullcrap into the game and trying to make this stuff look more attractive, they're just going to keep moving players away from the builds that they need to be able to actually kill bosses. Either that, or they need to bring back things like the Vault, which had no boss at the end. And that's why one of the reasons I really liked the Vault was because there was no boss at the end, and you could run builds like this, and you can have fun in the Vaults, because no boss at the end means you don't have to worry about that kind of stuff, except for the fact that frickin' the Butcher and Big Boy, I can't remember the new guy's name, would jump on your head. They were a little bit of a trouble if you were running a build like this. But for the most part, you could run vaults with CC builds with absolute ease and not have to worry about anything. Of Intercom, 5 to 10% increased damage for each second you stand till up to 40. Now 5 to 10% increased damage. Triple this bonus after standing still for 3 seconds. So, there's no cap? Is there no cap anymore? Like, what's the... I mean, it says up to 40, right? But then it says now deal... Okay, so no, it no longer stacks. So it's 10% increased damage, but it's triple when you stand still for 3 seconds. So it's 10% less? So that just brings it to 30, right? 10 times 3 is 30. So they brought it down by 10%, but made it... I guess people were abusing it too much. That's probably all there is to it. So they probably wanted to make it so that you actually had to stand still for 3 seconds to get the bonus, instead of getting the bonus for each second when you stand still. I mean, it's a flat 10% if you're standing still, but you get 30% if you stand still for 3 seconds. Hmm. 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 I mean, it was a flat 40% if you stood still. I mean, that's the whole thing with the way this ability worked. I feel like this is kind of a smack in the face to characters that play like Incinerate, like the Druid Storm skill, like basically anything that's a channeling skill that you stand still for that was utilizing Inner Calm. They're basically getting nerfed here because, why? Because people who weren't using in channeling skills were abusing it. It kind of sucks for the channeling skills. I mean, I don't really... I played Incinerate one season, and it was fun, I'll be honest. And it doesn't really... It's not really a meta build, and it's not really a build that's really all that amazing. So seeing them get nerfed is kind of silly. Of the Crowded Sage, it's a pretty good one. Previous, you heal for 181 life per second for each close enemy up to 605. Now you have an 8% increased dodge chance. Successful dodges restore 5 to 20% of your maximum life. Oh, hmm, hmm. I mean, I really liked Of the Crowded Sage. It grew on me really. I originally was very hesitant of the way that it worked, and to be honest with you, it works a lot more effectively than you think. And this is a nerf. I know that some of you guys might not see it this way, but it's definitely a nerf. Um, of the Crowded Sage was actually so powerful that you could literally stand within a group of monsters and your HP would just constantly regenerate without end. Like it would just constantly go up. And this basically makes it so that you have to actually successfully make a dodge chance to get that percentage, which for characters that are not built around dodging could potentially be impossible. Like you get 8% increased dodge chance, yes, but if you're not a rogue and you're not built around dexterity, there's a very good chance that you're not going to be able to utilize this. And yes, 20% of your maximum life sounds like a lot, but when you're talking about 181 life per second for each close enemy, up to 605 life per second, you can gain a lot of life per second from this. You might only dodge once every 10 seconds, depending on how crappy your dodge rate is, but this is going to be a static, constant regeneration, which never ceases, essentially. Even if you just have one monster near you, you are still constantly regenerating. And if you have enough monsters next to you, and believe it or not, if you put this on an amulet or something, it was actually absolutely amazing. You could throw this on an amulet and it would go up even further from like 605 to like 800 and some odd. I see this as an overall nerf, but a buff to the specific classes that have high dodge chance. In other words, you know what this really is? I mean, let's just say it like it is. Let's just say it plain like it is. It's a buff to rogues. Rogues are the class that have the most dodge chance, and this is literally a huge automatic heal upon dodging that is going to help one class essentially above all others, which is the rogue. The rogue is the easiest to build dodge chance on, and having this aspect on your rogue basically coming soon is going to be one of the easiest ways to keep yourself healed. But for every other class, essentially within the game, that doesn't have high percentage of dodge chance automatically and doesn't have ways to add in large amounts of dodge chance through their skills, this one is going to be essentially useless. So they basically just took one of the most overpowered healing skills and turned it into a rogue skill, which is stupid. It's stupid in my opinion. Bold Chieftain, I mean, let me also say this. If they wanted to add this, they could have just added it separate. They didn't have to ruin what was already a really good aspect. They didn't have to ruin the already really good aspect of the Crowded Sage to add in a crappy rogue aspect. They could have just added the crappy rogue aspect and left the of the Crowded Sage alone. Bold Chieftains, now usable by both Barbarians and Druids. Okay. Barbarians and Druids. I'm trying to remember exactly which one the Bold Chieftain is. I don't want to make a wrong assumption here. Whenever you cast a shout skill, cooldown is reduced. Yeah, that's the one. That's the one that everybody loves. And I hit 33,000. Sweet. I'm waiting on 35,000 so I can do my 35K in the bank song. 35K in the bank. 35K in the tank. So this is basically a way to reduce the cooldown. So whenever you cast a skill, its cooldown is reduced by X seconds per enemy nearby up to a maximum of 6 seconds. So essentially, you're going to be able to get that cooldown reduction on your Druid now, which is pretty cool. I'm assuming that that is going to apply to the Howl, the Werewolf Howl, and the Debilitating Roar from the the Bear. Needle Flare aspect also now applies Thorns to Necromancer's minions. Wow, okay. That's a huge buff to the Thorns Necromancer. I think I might be making a Thorns Necromancer in Season 4. That sounds absolutely amazing. Can you imagine all of your minions applying the needle flare aspect to every single thing that's, I mean, you throw on like a razor plate, get that nice thorns aspect. Mm, yeah, throw in the thorns in your equipment. Which, yeah, that sounds kind of OP. I think Thorns Necromancer's just got an absolutely crazy buff. Miscellaneous Necromancer, Barbarian, Druid, and Sorcerer companions now receive 100% of their players' attributes. They talked about this during the dev chat. So basically, your basically all the companions are now going to be 100% of the player's attributes. So if you have 30% crit, your minions are going to have 30% crit. If you have 50% damage reduction, then your minions are going to have 50% damage reduction, and so forth and so on. So no longer are the minions going to be like weak, pathetic versions of ourselves. They are going to be 100% versions of ourselves with the same stats that we have. So the Necromancer has definitely seen a huge buff with this, as well as the Companion Druid. And although the Barbarian is listed here, what companion does the Barbarian have? I guess the maybe the Ancients count? Is that what they're talking about? So the Ancients. And then, of course, you got the Conjurations from the Sorcerer. So, you know. All right. Skill tags have been updated everywhere to allow aspects and other effects to affect more skills and abilities examples. Applicable shout skills for Druid and Barbarian are now tagged as shouts. New chain tag for abilities like Chain Lightning and Rabies. New mobility tag for abilities that move or teleport the player, such as Caltrops or Teleport. More skills are now tagged as core skills, such as Sorcery Mastery skills, and other skills which use resources like Bone Spirit. So Bone Spirit is now a core skill. That's actually kind of crazy. So basically, the sorcerer. So that's a pretty massive change, to be honest, because there's a lot of stuff in the game that only is affected by core skills, and it's actually really interesting to see that things like Bone Spirit and I'm assuming Blizzard and whatnot will now be marked as core skills, because that also means that, yeah, that's actually a pretty big change overall. There's a lot of things in the game that only affect core skills, and having the core skill category like expanded is going to change the way a lot of stuff works. Additionally, various aspects have been updated to account for these changes. Barbarian, 10% innate damage reduction has been removed. Remember, I was telling you they've made a lot of characters weaker across the board. Legendary powers that require Call of the Ancients to be equipped no longer have that requirement. Previously, Dust Devils would have varying durations, speeds, and movement based patterns on which legendary aspect created them. Now they all behave consistently regardless of which aspect they are from. That's actually kind of interesting. Skills charge damage reduced from 250% to 180, so charge got nerfed. Power charge cooldown reduction per target hit reduced from 3 to 2. Cooldown reduction for hitting boss reduced from 6 to 4. Maximum cooldown reduction reduced from 9 to 6. I mean, this was an obvious change that was coming. Charge was going to get nerfed. They seem to do this on a regular basis, which is where they make one skill like really powerful for a season, and then everybody uses that skill for the season because, of course, they made it broken. And then the next season, they're like, yeah, we kind of overtuned that a little bit. We're going to dial it back, and then everybody gets upset, which seems to happen like every single season, and it looks like Charge is one of those. Furious Hammer of the Ancients. Previous Furious Hammer of the Ancients deals 1% times increased damage for each point of fury you had when using it. Now Hammer of the Ancients gains 2% plus increased critical strike chance for every 10 fury you had while using it. Wow, big giant nerf hammer to fury to frickin' Hoda. Holy Jesus, that's a nerf hammer to Hoda. Wow, okay. I guess Hoda barbs are pretty much done. I mean, this multiplier was the main multiplier that allowed them to do this much damage. So in combination with Furious Hammer of the Ancients being nerfed into an additive bonus, which only gives you critical strike chance, and on top of that, them also nerfing the main item that they used for Furious Hammer of the Ancients, which was the Lord's Talisman. It looks like Hoda's pretty much done. I guess the Barbarians are going to have to find another way to dish out 10 trillion damage. I'm not exactly sad about that. Hoda has had its run, and it has taken over the spotlight at just about every single freaking like test of anything that existed. I mean, if you took one look at the Abattoir of Zir leaderboards back when the Abattoir of Zir was running, it was pretty much primarily Hoda. Violent Rend. Rend's damage against vulnerable enemies is increased from 12 to 25%. Rupture. The initial damage from Rupture is now guaranteed to overpower. Interesting. Call of the Ancients. Correlate's leap damage is increased. Looks like Call of the Ancients is being increased massively because leap damage increased, frenzy increased, whirlwind damage increased, and upheaval damage increased. So basically, combined with the stat bonus increases, the new ancient Call of the Ancients item, the Call of the Ancients buff. Basically, Call of the Ancients has been buffed dramatically, so it looks like that's what they want you to use this season. Kick. Range of damage increased from 2.2 meters to 3. Ooh. Additional damage when enemy is knocked into a wall increased from 70 to 105%. Nice. Kick is a really fun one that I've played around with a lot on Barbarian, and I really, really enjoy it. Power Kick. Damage per fury consumed increased from 20 to 25%. Oh, wow. Kick got a bonus, an increase in damage. That's actually really nice. All my frenzy barbarian that I would play, that's one of the main skills he would use was kick, because I would stack up all my fury, and then I would burn it all with power kick, which is now going to be even stronger than it was before. A 5% increase here might not seem like much to you guys, but since it is a 5% increase per 10 Fury, and since I can get up to like 300 Fury, that's, what is that, 10, 20, 30, so that's 30 times 5, which would be a pretty ridiculous number. You're talking about, what, 150% multiplier increase on Power Kick? This is not a small increase, by the way. If you've never played around with Kick before, I would highly recommend that you check out Kick because, honestly, if you're running any kind of basic build or you have like an excess of essence or sorry fury on a regular basis, this is a really good way to spend. It's also a really good way to get the Berserker bonus from Wrath of the Berserker, which requires you to spend a certain amount of fury to get that bonus, and you basically just use Power Kick to get that bonus. It's really easy. Passives, Unbridled Rage, bonus damage reduced from 135% to 100%, weapon expertise, and polearm expertise. Lucky hit chance increased from 10 to 15%, damage while healthy increased from 10 to 15%. Two-handed mace expertise, fury gained increased from 2 to 5. Previous, you deal 15% increased critical strike damage to stunned enemies and vulnerable enemies while berserking. Now you deal 15% times increased critical strike damage while berserking. Okay, well, that's a pretty good change. Two-handed axe expertise, vulnerable damage reduced from 15 to 10%. One-handed expertise, critical strike chance against injured enemies increased from 5 to 10. I don't know why they're so excited about this critical strike chance. Has anybody, and I'm going to put this question out there for you guys that are watching right now. There's like 100 of you out here right now. Has anybody ever in Diablo 4 really had a problem getting their critical strike chance up? I feel like pretty much every character I've built in Diablo 4, for the most part, was like above 50% critical strike chance without trying. And I mean this, like without even really trying to get my critical strike chance higher, I was sitting at like 50% minimum. And then most of my characters, believe it or not, once I actually tried to get my critical strike chance higher, I would be at like 125 or like some stupid, ridiculous number past 100%. And I would actually have to tone down my critical strike chance to a lower number because I was exceeding the 100% cap. Like, they seem to be really hot dogging excited about these critical strike chance bonuses, and I don't understand why, because there's so freaking many of them in the game already that literally every single character has almost like a 100% critical strike chance pretty much all the time. and they keep piling him on too. They're like, have some more critical strike chance, have some more critical strike chance, have some more critical strike chance. You got your arms full, your mouth is full, like you can't carry any more critical strike chance. You're sitting at like 300% critical strike chance, and they're still trying to shove more crit in your face. I'm not really quite sure why they seem to be like doing this, but they don't. I don't think they understand. I don't think they've actually played the game, because if they did, they would know that we're literally already on like critical strike chance overload at this point. Paragon, Martial Glyph, cooldown reduction reduced from 4 to 2. That's a nerf. Blood Rage legendary cooldown, or legendary node, damage reduction by berserking bonus reduced from 25% to 10% and caps at 30% times damage bonus. That's another nerf. The Blood Rage one was the one that everybody was using to scale with, right? Like, if I remember correctly, it's the one that had the multiplier, that was increasing your damage based on your berserking, and I think everybody pretty much was utilizing it. Yeah, it was times 25%, and it would increase based on your berserking damage modifier, your additive. So that basically just absolutely destroyed a lot of damage on barbarians. That's another nerf. Crusher Glyph, additional bonus overpower damage reduced from 30 to 20%. That's another nerf for overpower. Dominate Glyph, bonus overpower damage per 5 willpower reduced from 39.9 to 14.9% at Glyph level 21. Additional bonus, after not overpowering for 30 seconds, your next attack will overpower. Now, every 30 seconds, your next attack will overpower. Okay. All right. Well, I mean, I think that's a buff, and this is a nerf. And this is a nerf. I mean, honestly, did anyone expect them not to hit the Hoda Barbarian hard eventually and figure out why the hell Hoda Barbarians were still doing massive amounts of damage despite the fact that they tried to nerf them multiple times? Um, you know what's funny though? And I'm gonna say this right now, and you can keep it on record for later, like clip it or whatever. It might not work. They have the Diablo 4 developers have a track record of nerfing things, like trying their absolute best to nerf something and failing miserably. They tried to nerf Hoda in Season 3 and they failed miserably. They tried to nerf Hoda in Season 2 and they failed miserably. Every single time they try to nerf something, like when they tried to nerf the Rogues Twisting Blades, they tried to nerf the Rogues Twisting Blades in beta and they failed. They tried on launch and they failed. They tried in Season 1 and they failed. They tried in Season 2 and they failed. They have a track record of failing to properly nerf things. So even though it looks like they've done a good job nerfing it, even though it looks like they have, I feel like we still need to go into the game and check it out, because who knows, they could still be hitting for like 1 billion damage for all we know. Let's see here. Seething Glyph. Additional bonus fury gain on enemy kill increased from 3 to 5. Fury gain is not really an issue, but I mean, it's nice. Legendary aspects of Sundered Ground. Description reworded for clarity, no functional change. Every 25 seconds, upheaval is guaranteed to overpower and deals 10 to 25% increased damage. This timer is reduced by 4 seconds when upheaval overpowers a boss or an elite enemy. Every 25 seconds, your next upheaval cast is guaranteed to overpower and deals 25% times increased damage. The timer is reduced by 4 seconds when upheaval overpowers a boss or elite enemy. Earthstriker's aspect, bonus overpower damage reduced from 35 to 50 to 10 to 15 to 30%. Now they're just nerfing everything across the board, aren't they? Aspect of the Relentless Arms Master, Fury generation while all 3 working arsenal bonuses are active increased from 20 to 35% to 35 to 65%. So they're trying to beef up walking arsenal. So they are successful at failing? Yes, they're pretty good at failing. I mean, you guys may be right. They might be successful this time, but we'll see. I ain't even gonna pretend to know the answer because every time I'm like, oh man, they nerfed the crap out of that, and then like the next time I'm in online, they're like, yeah, it's still good, and I'm like, what do you mean they nerfed the crap out of it? And they're like, yeah, but it still hits for like 10 trillion damage, and we don't really know why. I mean, yeah, they nerfed it. It doesn't hit for like 30 trillion damage anymore, but it still hits for 10 trillion damage, and I'm like, all right, whatever. Wind slashers aspect. Previous casting double swing twice within 1.5 seconds creates a dub devil. This is the one they changed. So casting double swing creates a dust devil that deals zero point 0.5 damage to enemies in its path. This is like a scaling modifier. They don't really show the actual damage here. Triple the amount of dust devils created if double swing is cast twice within 2 seconds. They succeed on something that doesn't work. That's a pretty funny way of putting it. Devilish aspect. Previous. After generating 100 Fury, your next attack that deals direct damage creates a Dust Devil that deals 0.24 to 0.38 damage to enemies behind the target. Now, after generating 100 Fury, your next direct damage creates 3 Dust Devils that deal 0.6 damage to enemies in their path. Dust Devils aspect. Whirlwind leaves behind Dust Devils that deal damage to surrounding enemies. 1 Dust Devil every 1.5 seconds. Now Whirlwind leaves behind Dust Devils that deal damage to enemies in their path. 1 Dust Devil every 0.75 seconds. So a 50% buff there. Veteran's Brawler now increases the damage for charge, leap, and kick. The timer on the buff has been removed. Good. Of Giant Strides. Previous reduces the cooldown of leap by seconds per enemy hit up to a maximum of 9 seconds. I've always been intrigued by this aspect, but I've never used it, and the reason is because there's always been better aspects to put in. Now, reduces the cooldown of leap by 2.5 to 5 seconds per enemy hit, up to a maximum of 9 seconds, and hitting a boss with leap provides a maximum cooldown reduction. So it provides 9 seconds when you hit a boss. Okay, that's a lot better. So you get a 9-second cooldown leap reduction. Their main problem with this, though, is there's a better way to do this than Of Giant Strides. It's the one that basically lets you reset leap's cooldown by utilizing kick or basically any brawling skill. So as soon as you use a brawling skill, it resets leap. And, or is it ground stomp? I think it's ground stomp or kick, ground stomp or kick. Basically, if you use ground stomp or kick, you reset leap, and it's way better than this one. This one's basically trash. Don't use this one. Even with the changes, it's still trash because a 9-second cooldown reduction is useless if you can just completely reset the skill entirely, which is basically what the other thing does. It's called it's like eternal stomping or something like that. It's a boot aspect, and it just works way better. And it's a boot aspect. Like, what else are you putting on your boots? Like, most of the time boot aspects are for the crappy aspects that nobody wants anymore, and this one goes on the boots and basically lets you reset leap like constantly. And it's one of my favorite ones. I pretty much use it on just about every character that uses leap. Of anemia, previous lucky hit direct damage against bleeding enemies has a 15 to 30% chance to stun them for 2 seconds. Now, lucky hit damage a bleeding enemy or vulnerable enemies has a 15 to 30% chance to stun them for 2 seconds. Okay, so they took away the direct damage. Sorry, I was brain farting there. I couldn't figure out what the hell they changed. So they took away the direct damage. So it's no longer direct damage against bleeding enemies. Now it's just damaging a bleeding enemy, which probably is going to make it actually trigger a hell of a lot more often if, for instance, bleeds can actually trigger the effect. So if you can make them bleed and then trigger the effect by making them bleed, then that actually seems insane. This is a huge buff for the of anemia aspect. And on top of this, there's also another aspect that makes it so that your damage that you have for bleeding is applied to the target if they're stunned. And that one's a really good one for the bleeding builds too. So basically, this is going to allow you to apply massive amounts of bleeding damage. And yeah, that's a huge buff for the bleed barbarians. Of vocalized empowerment, previously of echoing fury, now equipable by both barbarians and druids. Previous, your shout skills generate 2 to 4 fury per second while active. Now, your shout skills generate 5 to 10 primary resource per second while active. So they basically have now made 2 of the shout aspects accessible by the druids as well, which is really interesting. So the druid is now suddenly going to become a shout barbarian. Unique item, Rage of Haragroth. Haragath. This is the one that gives you the 20 to 40% chance to reduce cooldowns of your non-ultimate skills by 1.5 seconds when you inflict bleeding on elites. It was way too specific, and I bet without even reading the next line, they're probably going to make it work on more than just elites. So now, Lucky Hit inflicting bleeding on an enemy has up to a 20 to 40% chance to reduce the cooldown of your skills by 1 second. What do you know? I actually have a video on this, and in the video, I literally talk about how this item, while it's interesting, is way too damage on Tuesdays. And that was one of the complaints that I had about the item. And look, they fixed it, so it's no longer damage on Tuesdays. Azure Wrath, damage dealt when freezing enemies increased from 3 to 4.5 and can now trigger from non-core skills. They also don't have it listed here, but during the dev chat, they said that Azure Wrath was going to be usable by basically all characters that could use a sword. I don't know if that's 100% the truth, but they specifically did say that, like, the Necromancer could use it now, and the Sorceress apparently could use it now, and a bunch of other classes. So, like, I guess we'll find out. I thought this one was restricted to Rogue Barbarian. Wasn't it restricted to Rogue Barbarian at one time? But now it looks absolutely insane, and I'm actually kind of excited to use it. Could be fun to throw this on like a double swing Barbarian or something. Could be interesting. Fields of Crimson. The blood pool now makes enemies take increased damage from all damage types. Oh, that's a pretty big buff. Moving on to Druids. Spirit Boons, Pack Leader. Cooldown reset chance increased from 20 to 25%. Completely unnecessary. It already was ridiculous and would reset the minions as much as humanly. Like, literally half the time I couldn't even press the buttons fast enough with how quickly they would reset. But, you know, whatever. A buff is a buff. I'll take it. Energize, Spirit Restoration increased from 10 to 20. Masochist, critical strike healing increased from 3 to 5%. That's the one that it's for the shapeshifted. So whenever you're in the shapeshifted form and you're dishing out critical strikes, you get healing from those critical strikes. I used to love this skill, and now I hate it because of the way that Fortify works. So when you heal yourself, it doesn't heal the Fortify amount that you heal. And so Masochist would actually cause me to be never fortified, which was a really pain in the butt. If you like Masochist, it's an interesting ability, but don't go with Fortify if you're using it, because it's very difficult to stay fortified when you're using it, because you constantly heal yourself and out heal the fortification, which causes issues. I can't really explain it. Once you actually play around with it, you'll understand what I mean, but it does cause problems with fortification. They need to fix fortification so that when you heal yourself, you can, like, maybe restore part of the lost fortification. I'm not saying that allow healing to fortify you, but if you were fortified when you took the damage and then you heal yourself, it should restore the fortification that was lost or something like that. Because otherwise, you're just constantly out healing or outpacing your fortification, which is an issue. Skills, claw damage increased by 10%. Claw was already OP. Enhanced Claw, attack speed increased from 15 to 20%. And Claw was already OP, so nice changes. Maul, damage increased by 10%. Enhanced Maul, Fortify increased from 5 to 8%. In combination with the Frenzy aspect that they've added for Maul, basically, that turns Maul into Frenzy, there's definitely some options here for a, like, what would I call it? Basic Maul build. There's definitely a basic Maul build that's forming here. Raging Pulverize, stun duration increased from 2 to 3 seconds. Shred, damage increased by 10%. Enhanced Shred, healing increased from 2 to 4. They nerfed the crap out of Shred a couple patches ago, by the way, so it's only fitting that they throw it some doggy bones. Debilitating Roar, now categorized as a shout skill. This goes, of course, with their changing some of the aspects to work with Druid. Wolves now gain Unstoppable when the skill is cast. That's actually pretty nice. Petrify, Prime Petrify. Previous Petrify's durations are increased by 1 second. Now Petrify gains 50 Spirit when cast, and its effect durations are increased by 1 second. Supreme Petrify. Killing an enemy affected by Petrify grants 25 spirit. Now, killing an enemy affected by Petrify reduces its cooldown by 1 second. Hitting a boss with Petrify reduces its cooldown by 10 seconds. Lacerate, the skill nobody likes. Damage increased by 22%. Prime Lacerate. Previous Lacerate heals for 3% maximum life, double on critical strikes. Now Lacerate heals for 3% maximum life, doubled on critical strikes, and the first critical strike is guaranteed and deals 150% increased damage. Supreme Lacerate. Lacerate's initial strike is guaranteed to critically strike and deals 150% increased damage. This was moved to up here. So it's basically what they said during the dev thing, is that they moved Supreme Lacerate up here and they created a new Supreme Lacerate. So now Supreme Lacerate is whenever Lacerate critically strikes, your shifting skills deal 4% increased damage for 10 seconds up to 40%. I'm really not sure that these changes are actually going to make Lacerate useful. Lacerate is not useful because of the way that it works. It's a rather limited scope of damage. It also locks your character into the animation for the duration of the animation. It's not particularly a very good skill in form and function, and adding a buff to it, while interesting, I don't necessarily think is going to make it something that people are going to be interested in. I mean, yes, getting a 40% multiplier for using Lacerate is nice, and it does last for 10 seconds. So you would be encouraged to press the button to get your multiplier, but at the same time, it's not really better than some of the other legendaries that you could potentially be using. I think Petrify, by far, is better because Petrify gives you a multiplier as well. And on top of that, doesn't restrict you for the duration of its use, like Lacerate does. So it'll be interesting to see if people actually use Lacerate, but my guess is that even with these changes, because of the way that Lacerate works, they're probably still not going to use it. Passives Call the Wild damage increased from 10 to 12%, so that is the multiplier bonus that you gain for your minions, the little wolves and your poison creeper and whatnot. Quick Shift, previous, when shapeshifting skills transform you into a different form, it deals 7% increased damage. Now, when shapeshifting skills into a new animal form, you get 1% increased damage for 3 seconds, up to 6%. Heightened Senses. Previous, upon shapeshifting into a werebear or werewolf, gain 4% damage reduction against elites. Now, when shapeshifting into an animal form, werebear grants 2% damage reduction, and werewolf grants 2% movement speed for each for 6 seconds. Bonuses are doubled while both are active. So they took away some of the damage reduction. See, as what I'm talking about, they're reducing the damage reduction across the board. I wouldn't expect your character to be I wouldn't expect your character to be as tanky as they were in Season 3. They're probably going to be much less tanky. Clarity, previous, gain 2 spirit when transforming into human form. Now, after casting a companion skill, your next core skill or wrath skill's damage and critical strike chance are increased by 5% up to 15%. What a stupid change. Didn't I literally just get through talking about how critical strike chance is already overdone and how literally like we've got so much critical strike chance it's literally coming out of our ears like corn? Clarity was an amazing skill that basically gave you free spirit every single time you transformed into the human form. It was an absolutely undeniably useful skill. I mean, if you used anything that transformed into a human form at any point during the fight, you were basically getting free spirit by transforming into the human form and then transforming back, and it was a constant, never-ending gain of spirit that you could rely on. They basically have taken that away to give more critical strike chance, damage and critical strike chance, I guess. But still, it's. I guess since it gives a 15% multiplier, but at the same time, it's kind of just like against what's going on here. Like if you're trying to build companions, you might not necessarily be building a chord skill. Maybe you're doing like a full companion run with like the the poison creeper. Maybe you're running like the poison, all the poison modifiers like the tracker and the bane and whatnot, and you're trying to get your poison damage as high as possible. I mean, I don't know. I don't really understand why they would take this away because this one is amazing. If they wanted to add this, they could have added this somewhere else. Like you know what they could have done? They could have put this together with Call of the Wild. That's what they could have done. That would have been a good place to put this one. They could have shoved this one in with Call of the Wild to make Call of the Wild into a more attractive, thing to choose. They didn't have to ruin this one, which was an exceedingly good passive ability, which should have stayed exactly as it is. Digigrade Gate. Movement speed increased from 3 to 4%. Legendary aspects of the Changeling's Debt. Previous damage of poisoned enemy werebear skill instantly deal 124% of the poison damage and consuming the poison. Now you deal 40% increased damage while hitting a poisoned enemy as a werebear or crowd-controlled enemy as a werewolf. I mean, I guess that's good for the werebears that want to, or werewolves that want to utilize this, but I mean, wasn't the whole point of this to be for the poison classes so that the poison classes could get their poison damage as static damage? I don't know. It doesn't really seem like a good change to me either. I mean, I guess that gives more damage to the characters who are not running poison, who are poisoning things, which is really easy to do, by the way. You can add poison damage into your werebear or werewolf character pretty easily, but this was hard to come by. Like, being able to dish out all of your damage instantaneously was really hard to come by, and I think this is only one of only 2 aspects that can do this, and they already nerfed the other one too. So maybe that's deliberate. Maybe the entire point was to nerf the ability to apply your poison damage as direct damage. I don't know. Of the unsated previous, after killing an enemy with Shred, your next werewolf skill generates 25 to 35% more spirit and deals 25 to 32% more increased damage. Now, after killing an enemy with Shred, you gain 20% spirit, and your werewolf skills deal 25% increased damage when cast above 50 spirit. Okay. Of the Blurred Beast, that's the one I was talking about. That's the other poison one. Damage increased from 32% to 35%, so a little mediocre buff there. Night Howlers. Previous Blood Howl increases critical strike chance by 5 to 10%. In addition, Blood Howl increases also affects nearby companions. Now Blood Howl is now a shout skill and increases critical strike chance by 5 to 10%. In addition, Blood Howl also affects nearby companions and players for 3 seconds. Well, that's unfortunate. I thought they were just making Blood Howl into a shout skill, but if I have to use an aspect to turn it into a shout skill, now they're getting into the territory of too many aspects are required to achieve this. You got to understand that not only do you have to use the Bold Chieftains aspect and the other aspect to basically get the bonuses that you're trying to get, but now you also have to use the Night Howls aspect to turn Blood Howl into a shout skill to be able to get the other aspects to actually work. It honestly seems really stupid in my opinion. When I saw some of these things earlier and I was like, the like this one, Debilitating Roar, is marked as a shout skill, but Blood Howl is going to require you to utilize an item or an aspect to be able to get that. So you can't use Blood Howl as a shout skill without utilizing the Night Howler's aspect. That's kind of stupid. I like this aspect, don't get me wrong, but I feel like it should just be part of the skill. Like I've always kind of felt this way about this one, is that I don't really like ever using this aspect because there's always better aspects to use, and it should probably just be part of the skill. Like they need to just delete this from the game and just add this as the actual effect on the skill and just move on. because most of the time, whenever you're building a character and you want to utilize aspects that are going to help your character dish out more damage or increase a specific skill a certain way, this is usually the last thing on your mind. Um, I think this is a misstep in my opinion, especially because you're adding in more aspects that you have to use to buff this up, which means you're going to have to use a total of 3 aspects to get Night Howlers into its optimal condition, which is going to consume most of the aspect slots on your character. I can't say aspect for some reason. It's going to consume most of the aspect slots on your character to achieve this. If they remove this one and just add it directly to the skill, it'll go down to 2, which will be much more acceptable than 3. Raw Might. Now all shapeshifting skills contribute to buff stacks. Damage increased from 35 to 50 to 55%. Stun duration increased from 2 to 3 seconds. Shepherds. Now all Wrath skills also gain increased damage from his companions. This is part of the change that they're talking about where they were making it more things considered core skills. So like, for instance, Boulder is not a core skill unless you use the aspect, right? Well, Boulder would be in this pit as well because the Shepherd's aspect was only increasing core skills, and so now it's increasing also the Wrath skills as well, so I guess we'll see. Mangled. Previous, when you were struck as a werebear, you have a 25 to 40% chance to gain 3 spirit. Now, while in werebear form, you gain 10 to 25% spirit every 8 seconds. Of the Mending Stone, killing an enemy with any skill now replenishes the barrier as well as earth skills. Of Vocalized Empowerment, previously Echoing Fury. Now equipable by both Barbarians and Druids. Your shout skills generate 2 to 4 Fury per second while active, and your shout skills generate 5 to 10 primary resource per active. See, this is what I'm talking about. Now we've got like 4. There's like 4 different shout aspects now. I don't like the whole like you've got to use like 4 or 5 different aspects to be able to beef up a skill to the point where it's actually useful. The like I said, they really need to condense these down a little bit so that you don't have to use so many different aspects to achieve what you're trying to do with one particular skill. Because then it consumes every single aspect slot that you've got, and you can't really beef up your character the way that you're hoping to do. It actually gimps your character. Like, a lot of people don't know this, but when you have to use like 4 or 5 aspect slots on one skill, the rest of your character is going to suffer as a result. Unique items, Flesh Render. Damage bonus increased from 10 to 15. Previous debilitating roar and bloodhour deal damage to nearby poisoned enemies. Now it is casting a defensive skill deals damage to nearby poisoned enemies, increased by 15% for every 100 willpower you have. So they changed it from just the roars to all defensive skills. That's pretty interesting. I think my my defensive druid build that I had in season 2, or was it 1? I think it was season, I don't even remember actually now. But my defensive druid build that I made, which was actually pretty crazy, could very well have just gotten a buff up of insane proportions. Tracker Glyph, poisoning damage effect duration increased from 33% to 40%. Bane Glyph, poison effect double damage chance increased from 10 to 15%. Shapeshifter Glyph, critical strike chance increased from 20 to 25%. Wild Glyphs, damage increased from 120 to 130%. Inner Beast Legendary Node, after shapeshifting, your spirit costs are reduced by 10% for 5 seconds up to 30. Now, after shapeshifting, your spirit costs are reduced by 5% for 10 seconds, up to 45% if you reach 10 stacks. This bonus resets and reduces the cooldown of your ultimate skill by 5 seconds. Necromancer. Hey, we're moving on to Necromancer. Let me take a sip of water before we go on. These patch notes are ridiculous. Necromancer skills Blight. The tooltip now correctly references the defiled area for slow effect. Blood Mist, remove the movement speed reduction. That was a long time coming. Golem, this ability can now be activated while crowd controlled. Activating his ability makes the player unstoppable. Hey, they gave the Necromancer an Unstoppable for the first time. That's the first Unstoppable the Necromancer has gotten, like the entire game. Blood Mist does not count. You guys may be like, but Ginger, they've always had Blood Mist, and Blood Mist is an unstoppable. No, it's not an unstoppable. It's an invincible, and you're only invincible for the duration of the effect, and you can't do anything while Blood Mist is activated, so it doesn't really count as an unstoppable. This is an actual unstoppable, which means that you can use it and then actually utilize things like Tibalt's Will. You could not use Tibalt's Will with Blood Mist, which is proof in the pudding that Blood Mist is not an unstoppable effect, because you would basically could not actually utilize any of your skills like Bone Spear or Bone Spirit or Blight or anything during the activation of Blood Mist. So Necromancer essentially had no unstoppable whatsoever. So this is the first unstoppable that Necromancer has actually gotten that is utilizable with other skills like Tibalt's Will, for instance. Decompose. Reworded description to be more consistent with the use of corpses. Interval reduced from 1.5 to 1 seconds. Increased channeling essence generation from 8 to 10 per second. Upgrades now active when spawning corpses instead of channeling for 1 second. Enhanced Decompose. Decompose now causes an explosion, 40% weapon damage, when creating a corpse or when the target dies. Interesting. Now also generates 10 essence when creating a corpse. Acolytes Decompose. Every 1.5 seconds, Decompose makes enemies vulnerable for 4 seconds. Now Decompose explosions make enemies vulnerable. Movement speed bonus is now on Decompose explosions instead of channeling. So one of the big issues with Decompose is that it's a channel skill, and as a channel skill in a game that literally is basically Dance Dance Revolution, where you constantly have to be dodging explosions, puddles of poison, puddles of fire, etc., etc., etc. I could go on for days. Having a skill that is a channeling skill in a game like this is very deadly, and I don't think they understand that the reason people aren't using Decompose is not because it's a terrible skill. It actually does have some pretty useful mechanics, and the ability to generate corpses is not terrible. But the problem with it is that it forces you to stand still, and they basically still haven't addressed the fact that it forces you to stand still and gets you killed. Now, one thing that they could do is they could give it Decompose like a damage reduction bonus when it's being used so that you're less likely to die while you're using it, which is something that they definitely could have done. But what they're trying to do is they're trying to make Decompose so attractive that you basically have no choice but to use it. They're like, wow, look at all these amazing things it does. It's so awesome. It makes the monster vulnerable. It causes the corpses to explode. But then they still haven't really addressed the fact that if you're using it and you're standing still, there's a very good chance you're going to die. It looks good. Positive, things here. The changes that they're making to the ability look good and it looks very attractive, but I still think that it's going to be a problem that you have to stand still when you're using it. And then on top of that, to get the full bonus of this ability, you also have to use aspects to make it work. There are several aspects that actually make Decompose into a very effective ability, and it consumes a lot of your character, your aspect slots to actually make Decompose into a good ability, which I also don't rather appreciate. It could be interesting to see if you could make like a Decompose like basic skill necromancer just for the fun of it, though. With the way that they have this thing buffed up, it definitely seems like something that you could do. Army of the Dead increased spawn rate of volatile skeletons by 50%. That's actually kind of insane, especially considering every single time a volatile skeleton spawns, they spawn a corpse. I played around with this during season, I think it was season 2, where I made a minion necromancer. And I was actually kind of surprised with just how many corpses were on the battlefield on a regular basis while using volatile skeletons, to the point of kind of insanity. And increasing the spawn rate of the volatile skeletons by 50% means that you have even more corpses on the ground. So, interesting. Supreme Army of the Dead, spawn rate adjusted to match volatile skeletons, um, is now categorized as a summoning skill. Oh, interesting. So your summoning skill bonuses will affect Army of the Dead. Passive Inspiring Leader. After you have been healthy for at least 2 seconds and your minions, you gain bonus attack speed. Now, while you are healthy, you gain a 4, 8, 12 plus increased critical strike chance, and your minions gain 18% increased critical strike chance. That's not a good change. That's a bad change. That's in the opposite. That's the so they recently made it so that you gained a bonus multiplier for your minions on every percentage increased attack speed that your minions get up to a certain percentage of actually there was no cap. So basically the more increased attack speed you get your minions, the more damage they would deal. So taking away attack speed from the minions is the equivalent of taking away damage from the minions because the attack speed was the equivalent of damage. And then critical strike chance bonuses are essentially useless at this point because they made it so that your minions inherit 100% of your stats, and if you're able to get your critical strike chance at 100%, then this is completely pointless because you're essentially getting nothing at this point. You're just getting I don't even know what you're getting here. Like the Inspiring Leader passive has basically become garbage for most characters. If you can get your critical strike chance up high enough for your own Necromancer, then this will be useless because it's not really going to do anything for your minions. They also took away the attack speed, which was actually giving your minions increased damage and also making them attack faster, which essentially makes Inspiring Leader useless. It's essentially a useless passive now. You might as well just pass up on that one and not even use it. Kalen's Edict, previous, after you have not taken damage for at least 2 seconds, your minions gain 15% increased attack speed. This bonus has doubled when you have at least 7 minions. Now your minions gain 3% attack speed for each active minion. I believe that's a net buff because you can have a total of, what is it, like 13 minions, if I remember correctly. So 13 minions times 3. 13 times 3, that's 39%. So yes, that is quite an increase in attack speed that you could potentially get there, which is a pretty big buff. So Kalen's Edict is going to be a huge buff for your damage output on a minion Necromancer. Book of the Dead. Skeletal warriors will now run ahead of the Necromancer more often and can initiate combat. Skirmishers remove 3-second time limit from the second upgrade. Reapers, first upgrade, Reapers attack enemies who are mobilized, slowed, or stunned. Wind up attack for 2 seconds. Now the wind up attack now reduces one of your active cooldowns by 3 seconds, which is pretty cool. Defenders now taunt enemies in area around them instead of negating damage every 6 seconds from the first upgrade. Second upgrade changed from increasing thorns inherited from the player to defenders to reduce damage taken by 99%. Okay, so the defenders have basically become god tier tanks with a 99% damage reduction. I'm gonna laugh if the defenders still die. Like, I'm gonna laugh. Like, I'll be in there, I'll be the first one. Like, I'll put my defenders out with their 99% damage reduction, and if they still die with their 99% damage reduction, I'm just gonna be like hilariously laughing, freaking at everything, because with a 99% damage reduction, they shouldn't die to anything. But how much do you want to bet they still die? Shadow Mages attacks now pierce. That's a pretty nice buff. First upgrade, Shadow Mage's attacks have a 10% chance to stun for 2 seconds. This cannot happen. This cannot happen. Tune. It's got to be to the same enemy more than once every 5 seconds. Now you deal 3% times increased damage for each active Shadow Mage. Additional Shadow Bolt now occurs every second attack after the second upgrade. Cold Mages attacks now gain 3 essence from the first upgrade, and attacks now apply vulnerable without condition. Before, they only applied vulnerable with condition, which was a little terrible.
I'm not really sure what they changed here. Did it always give 3 essence whenever they attacked for the cold mages? I was utilizing that a lot on my necromancer. Bone mages, first upgrade reduces the life cost of your bone mage's attack from 15 to 10%. After being alive for 5 seconds, bone mages deal 40% times increased damage. Now bone mages have a 25% chance to cast bone splinters or bone spear if it is on your equipped skills. Wow, that's actually pretty sweet. Second upgrade. Each time the Bone Mages dies from its own attack, they leave behind a corpse and fortify for 20% of your maximum life. Now, Bone Mages drop a corpse when they die. Bone Mage attacks will grant 3% maximum life fortify. This is actually pretty darn interesting, and I rather like that a lot, actually. This could be a very interesting way to create a Bone Spear Necromancer now. If the bone mages can just randomly cast bone spear, that's, I mean, they're inheriting 100% of your stats, so the bone spear that they're going to cast is basically going to be a full powered bone spear. Blood Golem. Golem now absorbs 30% up to 15% from the first upgrade. The second upgrade active ability from the Golem also heals the player for 5% of the maximum life for each enemy drained. Bone Golem previous. Each time your Bone Golem takes 20% maximum life, its damage sheds a corpse. It was terrible. Spawns 5 corpses around the Golem where its ability is used, and that's pretty nice. So every time you tap the ability button, you get 5 corpses. I like that. That's a really good change. Way better than this bullcrap change, which barely even worked. So basically, this is going to give you a button that you could just press at any time, and that button that you press is going to give you 5 corpses, which is going to be very useful for resummoning your army when you need to. Although, if you're a minion mancer, I highly recommend that you go with Army of the Dead because it resummons your whole army anyway. Second upgrade, previous, your Bone Golem gains 10% maximum life, and the amount of thorns it inherits is increased by 30 to 50%. Now your Bone Golem unleashes bone spikes when taking damage. So you might be wondering why they're taking this away, and you might be thinking that this is a nerf, but because of the inherits 100% of your stats effect, that means that your minions are all going to be inheriting 100% of your thorns now. So you don't have to worry about this anymore. This is not them taking something away because the base was always a 30%. If you guys were unaware of this, your minions always inherited 30% of your stats. If you had 100% crit, they had 30% crit. But now with the change of your minions inheriting 100% of your stats, they're going to inherit 100% of your stats. So 100% crit means 100% crit on your minions. If you have 10,000 thorns, they're not going to get 30% of your thorns anymore. They're going to get 10,000 thorns. They're going to get the full Monty. So they're taking all these little bonuses away because they don't do anything anymore. And they took them away on basically all of the minions so far. So now your Bone Golem unleashes bone spikes when taking damage. That's interesting. Iron Golem, first upgrade. Now cast Shockwave for 2 attacks instead of 4. Shockwave damage increased from 40 to 154%. Second upgrade, now pulls enemies in instead of applying vulnerable. Interesting. So we get your own little pull in with the Iron Golem. Legendary aspects. Blood-soaked aspect. Previous, your movement speed is no longer reduced while Blood Mist is active. Now, while in Blood Mist form, increases movement speed by 20%. So they took away the movement reduction, and now they also added an increase in movement speed. So it sounds like Blood Mist is going to get really fast. So not only does it no longer have the reduction in speed, and not only does the blood-soaked aspect that used to just simply remove the movement speed, it increases the speed. If you also utilize it with the other aspect that increases your movement speed while unstoppable, you can basically get a huge movement speed bonus while using your Blood Mist now. I think, what is it, like 40% increased movement speed while using Blood Mist? Unyielding Commander aspect. Previous, while Army of the Dead is active, your minions gain 70 to 84% increased attack speed. And take 90% reduced damage. Now, while Army of the Dead is active, your minions deal 70 to 100% increased damage and take 90% reduced attack speed. So this is another nerf. because of the way that they changed the aspect. So that's what I was telling you guys is that they have this aspect basically, or this it's not the aspect. What is it? The legendary node. I think it's the legendary node. The one that makes is for the minions. That basically gives you a multiplier for each percentage of attack speed that you were increasing. And this unyielding commander's aspect worked really well with the way that that worked because it increased the attack speed of your minions, which in turn gave you a multiplier for your minions and basically made them attack faster and dish out more damage in the process. And they're kind of stripping attack speed from the Necromancer, which is rather unfortunate. And by stripping attack speed from the Necromancer, they're also reducing that multiplier that comes from that particular effect. And it's not necessarily a good thing. This right here, 70 to 100% increased damage is certainly okay, but they also slowed down the minions in the process, making them attack slower but dish out more damage, which might end up being a wash in the long run, especially if you consider that you were getting a multiplier from this as well. And you could throw this on your amulet, which increased the attack speed bonus to almost like 200%, by the way. It was actually kind of insane. I remember specifically doing it myself and having like a ridiculous amount of attack speed from this particular aspect. And I don't know how this one is going to work out. I feel like they're giving the Necromancer some buffs, but then they're also taking away a lot of specific things because they're afraid the Necromancer is going to be overpowered or something. I mean, how many times have they buffed the Minion Mancer, and how many times has the Minion Mancer really been overpowered? It's been zero, right? Like the Minion Necromancer has never really been overpowered. So I don't know why they're afraid, and they're taking away the attack speed bonuses. Unless the Minion Necromancer is really going to be broken, but I don't know. Occult Dominion also increases the max number of skeletal warriors by 2. Blood Getters, previous, your maximum number of skeletal warriors is increased by 2. That's actually pretty nice. Now your skeletal priests also empower you at 55 to 70% effectiveness. So they heal you? So you get healed by your skeletal priests? Did they take away the increase to the number of minions? So Occult Dominion increases the number of minions, and then they took away the number of warriors here and then turned it into a heal. Flesh Rending, when decomposed spawns a corpse, gain 25 to 40 essence. After when decomposed explodes, gain 25 to 40 essence. Rotting, when decomposed can chain a burst up to 2 additional targets. This is what I was talking about, another one of the aspects that makes decompose good. They changed it to decompose can chain and burst up to 2 additional targets. Explosions from decompose deal 30% times increased damage. Of the Damned, you deal 50% times increased shadow damage to enemies afflicted by both Decrepify and Iron Maiden. I hated this one because I never liked running Decrepify and Iron Maiden at the same time. After you deal 40 to 50% increased shadow damage to enemies afflicted by any curse. That's actually a good change. I don't really particularly enjoy running both curses at the same time. I also don't really like Iron Maiden. I think it's kind of stupid, to be perfectly honest. So that's actually a good change. Of Untimely Death, previous, each percent of your maximum life you heal beyond 100% grants you 0.5% bonus overpower damage to your next overpower attack up to 30 to 60% times. After each percent of your maximum life you heal beyond 100% grants you 0.5% bonus critical strike damage on your next critical strike up to 30 to 60% times bonus. So they basically took away the overpower bonus and turned it into critical strike damage bonus, which I'm not really entirely sure I understand that one because isn't it focused on the Blood Necromancer that can overpower at will, basically, because of the overpower stacks and things like that? So, like, isn't this just a effective nerf to the Blood Necromancer, but then also a tiny buff to the non-Blood Necromancers? I'm not entirely sure I really understand the way that this one works or why they would go this route. I mean, it seems more generally useful because it's critical strike damage instead of overpower, which not all classes are very good at utilizing overpower. But then at the same time, it seems like a nerf to the one class that can actually heal themselves all the time, which is the Blood Necromancer using the Blood Orbs. And then at the same time, the other builds within the Necromancer can't really utilize the healing them. I'm not really sure about this one. I mean, I guess it's more generally useful and less useful toward the one class that it was actually pointed at, or the one build that it was pointed at. There is no time listed anywhere, Augur. Of Potent Blood, previous, while healthy, Blood Orbs grant 10 to 25 Essence. After, Blood Orbs grant 10 to 25 Essence. If you're looking for a time, though, I would pretty much assume like early in the morning in California. Just assume like 8 or 9 or 10 o'clock California time. Ring of Mendel. Lucky hit up to a 10% chance to empower all your minions, causing the next attack from each to explode for X physical damage. Now, every 6th attack from the minion is empowered, exploding for X physical damage. That's interesting. So instead of it being a 10% chance, now it's just every 6th attack, which if you calculate that out at 1/6% chance, I mean, you're talking about what would that calculate out to in a percentage? You just take what, 6 and divide it. Trying to remember here. Well, it's only 1 out of every 6. Convert 1/6 into a percentage. So 1/6 into a percent is 16.67%. So it's essentially an increase of 6.67% on the explosions. And it's also guaranteed. So the thing about Lucky Hit is that, well, while it was 10% Lucky Hit chance, it also could just not happen. Like there's also a chance that you would get 6 hits and it just wouldn't occur. So this is a guaranteed explosion every 6th attack, which is actually pretty powerful. Paragon Control Glyph. Additional bonus, you gain your minions 10% times increase in slowed or chilled. Very conditional there. Now it's changed to additional bonus, you and your minions deal 20% times increased damage to crowd-controlled targets. Still conditional, but less conditional, I guess. Dead Razor Glyph, additional bonus damage, additional bonus, maximum bonus increased. That's a lot of bonuses. To 15% times. Cult Leader Paragon Node, your minions deal 15% times increased damage for each 20% times of attack speed bonus they have. Now your minions deal 30% times increased damage for each 20% times in attack speed bonus they have, up to a maximum of 100% attack speed bonus. So this is the Cult Leader one that I was talking about. So it used to be 15% times increased damage for each 20% of attack speed bonus they have, which basically meant that if you had a total of, say, for instance, 300%, which was totally possible, by the way, you could totally end up with 300% attack speed. You with 300 divided by 15 would get you, or was it 20? It's 300 divided by 20, sorry. 20 would get you a total of 15 entries into this, and it's 15% times per entry, which would be a total of a 225% multiplier. The thing is, though, is that now that they've changed it, we're looking at a different calculation. So we currently have your minions deal 30% times increased for each 20% increase of attack speed bonus, but it is capped at a maximum of 100%, which means 100 divided by 20 is 5 times 30 gets us a bonus of 150%. So basically they've nerfed that by approximately 75%. So it's been nerfed by a 75% multiplier. It is going to be easier to hit at a 100% attack speed bonus, but at the same time, they've taken away a large number of bonuses of attack speed that the Necromancer had at his resources. So the problem with this is that you have a lot less attack speed bonus options to increase your attack speed, of your minions, which means that it's going to be harder to hit the 100% attack speed bonus. Now, because your minions are going to be inheriting 100% of your stats, I don't know if that also means they're going to be inheriting your attack speed bonus, which could potentially mean that you might have to stack attack speed on yourself to increase the attack speed of your minions, which I'm not really entirely sure how this is going to work out. But you're definitely going to want to try and hit that 100% attack speed bonus to get your minions to their maximum value so you can get that multiplier. Rogue. Moving on to the Rogue. Stun grenades, granted by various aspects, base stun duration has been increased from 0.5 to 1 second. Inner Sight. While Inner Sight gauge is full, you also gain 25% increased critical strike chance for 4 seconds. Again, most characters didn't have any trouble with critical strike chance. Attacking enemies that are not marked will fill the gauge, but at 5% of the normal rate. That's interesting. Preparation, reduced energy requirement from 100 to 75. Flurry, damage increased from 66 to 75%. Like I told you guys earlier, they're beefing up Flurry. Volley can now be canceled slightly earlier from another skill. Passive, Victimize, fixed an issue where this wasn't activating and scaling from certain instances. Increased chance to proc from 45% to 50%. Victimize is, if I remember correctly, why am I blanking? I think I know what it is, but I'm for some reason I'm not remembering exactly. Victimize is that the key passive? Yes, it's the key passive, the one that does the explosions and everything. So apparently it wasn't activating and scaling in certain instances and increased the chance of proc. Victimize is a pretty nice skill for dealing with trash mobs, but it kind of sucks for dealing with bosses, unfortunately. I actually absolutely love Victimize on my rogue, but I've come to the realization that it's maybe not the best one for single target damage. Amazing for AoE damage, though. Like, oh my god, I can't even explain. Exploit weakness, legendary node, maximum increased damage buff from 15 to 25%. Leirana's instinct, legendary node, has been changed to when inner sight gauge becomes full, you gain 100% dodge chance for 2 seconds. Your core skills deal increased damage equal to 25% of your core skill damage bonus, while inner sight's gauge remains full. So basically, they just kind of cut out the your next 3 core skills deal increased damage, and just kind of changed it to your core skills deal increased damage while the bonus is active, which I guess that's a lot better. Chip Glyph increases physical damage bonus from 6.6 to 9.9 for each dex to 5 dexterity purchase within range. Pretty big buff for the physical Zons. Legendary aspects, aspect of encircling blades, increase the damage range buff from 10 to 25 to 15 to 30. Opportunist, previous, when you break stealth with an attack, you drop a cluster of exploding stun grenades around your location that deal physical damage and stun enemies for 0.5 seconds. Now, when you enter or break stealth, you drop a cluster of exploding stun grenades that deal physical stun damage for 1 second. And you also get a bonus damage to your grenades of 40%. Now, additionally, increases grenade skill damage from 25 to 40%, the Tricksters. Of Surprise, now additionally increases grenade skill damage by an additional 40%. Of Artful Initiative, now increases the grenade skill damage by another 40%. And damage increase is now arranged with higher potential. Of Uncanny Treachery, previous, dealing direct damage to a dazed enemy with agility skill grants stealth for 4 seconds. Breaking stealth with an attack grants you 15-20% crowd control, impaired duration reduction for 4 seconds. Now it will change to dealing damage to a dazed enemy with an agility skill grants stealth for 4 seconds, and when stealth breaks, you gain a 100% dodge chance for 2 seconds. I mean, you know earlier when I said that them changing of the Crowded Sage to the dodge chance thing was a direct buff to the rogue? This is literally like allowing the rogue to utilize the Crowded Sage to completely full heal. You got to think that if you're gaining 20% health every time you dodge, and you have a 100% dodge chance for 2 seconds, that means that this will be an instant 100% self-heal, anytime you use it. So if you use the of uncanny treachery aspect, you are going to combine that with the of the crowded sage aspect, and every single time you tap that button to basically, like dealing direct damage to a dazed enemy with an agility skill, grant stealth for 4 seconds, and then once you break stealth, you get a 100% dodge chance, which is going to immediately full heal you back up to full. And then you can continue doing this over and over and over again by essentially just full healing yourself constantly. I mean, granted, it won't prevent you from getting one shot, but it will basically give you infinite health. So congratulations, rogues, on your infinite health loop. Of siphoned victuals, lucky hit damaging a vulnerable enemy with a core skill has up to a 10 to 20% chance to drop a healing potion. Now damaging a vulnerable enemy with a non-basic skill has a 5 to 20% chance to drop a healing potion. Frostbitten. Chilled enemies hit by your grenades have a chance equal to double your critical strike chance to be instantly frozen for 2 seconds. You deal 10 to 25% increased critical strike damage against frozen enemies. Now it's been changed to enemies hit by your grenade skills have the same chance as your critical strike chance to be frozen for 2 seconds. So if you have a 100% critical strike chance, you've got a 100% chance to freeze them for 2 seconds. And you deal 25% increased critical strike damage to stunned or frozen enemies. Escape Artist. Smoke Grenade dodge effect cooldown has been reduced from 45 to 25 seconds. Of the Quickening Fog, maximum dash cooldown reduction is reached from hitting 3 enemies, reduced from 5. Of Volatile Shadows, when Dark Shroud was removed, you would trigger an explosion around yourself and dealt as shadow damage. Now, when Dark Shadow is removed, you trigger an explosion around yourself that deals shadow damage and applies shadow imbuement to each enemy it hits. Interesting. That's actually a pretty powerful change. Blast Trappers. Lucky hit, dealing direct damage to enemies affected by your trap skills has up to a 30-50% chance to make them vulnerable for 3 seconds. Now, Lucky hit, dealing damage to enemies affected by your trap skills has a 15 to 30% chance to cause an explosion that deals shadow damage and applies vulnerable for 2 seconds. Of Lethal Dusk. Previous evading through an enemy infected by shadow imbuement grants stealth for 4 seconds. Breaking stealth with an attack grants you 1 to 5% maximum life on the kill for 6 seconds. Now, evading through an enemy infected by shadow imbuement grants stealth for 4 seconds. Breaking stealth grants you 10 to 25% maximum life. Why is the rogue getting tons and tons of self-heals? It's a rather odd question, but like, it feels like they just constantly are giving the rogue more and more self-heals. I mean, they've got the Of the Crowded Sage now, which is a massive self-heal. Then they got this self-heal, and then they also got a couple different things that give them 100% dodge chance, which also in turn give them so huge amounts of self-heals. Like, the rogue can basically just full heal herself like 4 or 5 times in a row at this point, like, with ease. Vengeful, previous lucky hit, making an enemy vulnerable up to 40-60% chance to grant 3% critical strike chance for 3 seconds up to 9. Now, lucky hit, damaging vulnerable enemies has a 25% chance to create an arrow storm at the location, dealing physical damage over 3 seconds, and your arrow storm deals 25 to 40% more damage. So they changed arrow storm to vengeful. Of arrow storms. Previous, your lucky hit marksman skills have a 10% chance to create an arrow storm at the enemy's location, which it's a buff from 10 to 25%. Lucky hit, your marksman skills have a 36% chance to create an arrow storm at the enemy's location, dealing physical damage over 3 seconds. Your arrow storms deal 25 to 40% increased damage. Note the maximum number of active arrow storms remains at 5. We are just removing this from the tooltip to make it more succinct. But what is this a typo up here? I feel like this is a, like, where was your Well, you know what? I guess they just have multiple ways to get arrow storms now. But, I mean, if that's the case, if there's 2 different aspects that both generate arrow storms, and the number of arrow storm maximum is still at 5, and you have literally 1 here and 1 here that both give you arrow storms, but you can only still get a maximum of 5, why would you run both And why wouldn't you just run the one that has the 36% chance over the one that has the 25% chance? Which, I mean, yes, you do get a bonus damage for running both of them, but why would I want to take up 2 aspect slots to run 2 different arrow storms at the same time? Unique item, a Writhing Band of Trickery, reduce cooldown from 10 to 6. That's the pull-in. Sorcerer mastery skills are now also considered core skills. Sorceress. Enchantments, Frost Nova enchantment, chance for conjuration to cast. Skills to cast Frost Nova increased from 30 to 35%. Frost Bolt enhancement, enchantment, chill amount increased from 15 to 18%. Flame Shield enchantment. Previous Flame Shield automatically activates when taking fatal damage. This effect can only happen once every 120 seconds. Now Flame Shield automatically activates after cumulatively losing 100% maximum life and can only happen once every 30 seconds. They basically nerfed this to basically take away Hardcore's ability to prevent their own death. We received feedback from players that cheat death mechanics are not desired. The Flame Shield enchantment has been changed to not react to fatal damage, but instead to react to taking 100% of your health as within a 30-second window. So basically, and this is in combination with them removing the cheat death potions too. So hardcore is actually hardcore now. And if there's basically no way to cheat death in hardcore at this point, you don't have any potions to cheat death with, and you can't use Flame Shield to cheat death, which means that for the first time since the launch of Diablo 4, hardcore is actually hardcore, which is actually kind of interesting. Skills, Frozen Orb, new functionality. Travel distance is now controllable, which is one of the things that they changed. So depending on where you click, Frozen Orb will travel to that location and then explode at the location that you choose, which is pretty neat. Damages have increased by 20%. Enhanced Frozen Orb. When cast above 40 mana, Frozen Orb's explosion damage is increased by 45% against elites and 30% against all other enemies. While healthy, the explosion of Frozen Orb deals 45% increased damage. So there's 2 different ways. That's actually, I think that's better. Maybe. I don't know. I'm not really sure if I consider that better or not. Because while healthy and above 40 mana, I feel like maintaining above 40 mana was easier than maintaining the while healthy status effect. According to what I understand, the disconnection protection is still in place. They put that in place a while ago, which basically automatically uses your scroll of escape if it detects a disconnect. That is not considered a cheat death mechanic. That's just a disconnect protection. And I don't think most people had any issue with the disconnect protection. Greater Frozen Orb, vulnerable chance increased from 30 to 40%, and duration increased from 2 to 3 seconds. I'm going to have to make a Frozen Orb character this season. Ice Armor, Enhanced Ice Armor, mana regeneration increased from 25 to 30%. Shimmering Ice Armor, previous enemies that hit you while Ice Armor is active have a 15% chance to become frozen for 3.23 seconds. Now, while Ice Armor is active, you reduce its cooldown by 2 seconds for every 50 mana you spend. I mean, that's a good change, I feel like. Reducing the cooldown for every 50 mana you spend. You can go through some mana pretty darn fast, and so you can consume a large amount of mana. There are a lot of ways to reduce your mana cost, though, and ways that might make it not as interesting. Because, like, if you have a lot of things that are reducing the active cost of your spells, then it might be a lot harder to spend 50 mana and also thereby activate the cooldown reduction, so I don't know. Mystical Ice Armor. Previous damage against vulnerable enemies contributes 50% more to Ice Armor's barrier. Now, while Ice Armor is active, you periodically chill close enemies for 20% and deal 15% increased damage to frozen enemies. Shimmering Frost Nova. Previous Frost Nova generates 4 mana per enemy hit. I love that. Now, Frost Nova grants 3% dodge chance per enemy hit, up to 15%. Hitting a boss gives a maximum amount for the next 8 seconds. You keep this effect, and successful dodges generate 20 mana. Hmm. I mean, I. I mean, successful dodges generating 20 mana seems nice, but it's nowhere near as good as Frost Nova generates 4 mana per enemy hit. Um, I feel like there's a disconnect here between the person generating these effects and the skill itself and what it does. Like, are they not aware that Frost Nova freezes the enemies solid to the point where they can't attack you? And so, if the monsters are frozen solid, then what are you dodging? And if you're not dodging anything because the monsters are all frozen, then how are you generating mana? I feel like it's an effective nerf because at the core of the way that the skill works and how it freezes basically all enemies within range, you're essentially making it so that it does nothing. Because if the monsters are frozen, they're not hitting you. And if they're not hitting you, you're not dodging. And if you're not dodging, then you're not generating mana. And so at the end of the day, it's going to be less effective overall than just simply generating 4 mana per enemy hit. It's also only for the next 8 seconds after utilizing the ability. So you're going to utilize the ability. Everything is going to be frozen for most of those 8 seconds. And the only monsters that are going to be able to hit you are ranged monsters that are outside of the radius of the Frost Nova, which essentially means that it's useless at this point. Flame Shield, enhanced Flame Shield. Previous Flame Shield grants 25% increased movement speed while active. Now Flame Shield has a 50% larger burn radius. Mystical Flame Shield. Previous, you gain 25% mana cost reduction while Flame Shield is active. I love that. After Flame Shield ends, surrounding enemies are stunned for 3 seconds, and your next skill within 10 seconds is a guaranteed critical strike. So they took away the mana cost reduction on Flame Shield. That's rather unfortunate. Teleport. Enhanced teleport. Previous teleport's cooldown is reduced by 0.5 seconds per enemy hit up to 3 seconds. Now you gain 30% movement speed for 3 seconds after teleporting. Mystical teleport. For 4 seconds after teleporting, crackling energy hits 2 additional enemies. Now teleport deals 500% increased damage. It also forms a crackling energy for each enemy it hits up to 3. Well, that has basically just created a Oculus teleport spamming build. You could totally utilize this with Oculus, get like the really high cooldown reduction, and just spam teleport into combat, dishing out massive amounts of damage as you teleport around, forming crackling energies. And each crackling energy basically is going to give you more lightning damage, which is going to hit more targets. That's like a whole Oculus build right there. Supreme Deep Freeze now applies vulnerable for 5 seconds when it ends. Ice Shards damage is increased by 28%. Enhanced Ice Shards ricochet chance increased from 40 to 50%. Hydra baseline maximum amount has been increased from 1 to 2. Lightning Spear damage increased by 8%. Greater Charged Bolts damage increased from 25 to 35%. Incinerate, now functionally gain a 15% baseline damage reduction while channeling, a very good change. Wasn't I literally just talking about this with Decompose earlier on the Necromancer, how Decompose is a channeling skill, you're forced to stand still, and so you really need some sort of damage reduction while you're utilizing the ability because it's very dangerous to stand still in Dance Dance Revolution Diablo 4. So having a 15% baseline damage reduction while channeling is an extremely good change. Damage increased by 10% as well. Passives, Elemental Attunement, cooldown reset chance increased from 5% to 7%. Mana shield damage reduction increased from 7 to 8%. Devouring Blaze, crowd control enemies now provide the damage bonus instead of mobilized. Conjuration Mastery. Previous, you gain 1% increased damage for each active conjuration. Now you gain 1% increased damage, 1% movement speed, and 2% mana regeneration for each active conjuration. That's pretty powerful. That's going to go along with that the build I was talking about earlier with the new unique item. because the new unique item basically makes it so that your conjurations cast your frozen orbs, and so of course you're probably going to utilize this with them as well. Convulsions, lucky hit chance to stun enemies increased from 3 to 5%. This is a pretty powerful one if you're a lightning sorceress. Shocking impact, damage increased by 100%, 0.2 to 0.4. Elemental dominance, damage increased from 3% to 4%. Legendary aspects, abounding conduit. Previous gained 15 to 30% movement speed for 3 seconds after teleporting. Now teleport's cooldown is reduced by 1 to 2.5 seconds after teleporting. Crackling energy hits 2 additional enemies for 5 seconds. Again, a whole Oculus teleport spamming build. I can guarantee it. Frozen Orbit, damage is increased from 30 to 40% to 45 to 65%. This is a Frozen Orb buff. And it's a pretty nice one. Basically, what it is that you can set up your Frozen Orb to cast an additional Frozen Orb after you've cast it. It basically gives you a free secondary Frozen Orb. And this one's actually pretty powerful, and increasing the damage of this is going to go a long way to making the Frozen Orb build pretty popular this season. Of concentration, your mana regeneration is increased if you have not taken damage in the last 2 seconds. Now, casting a conjuration skill grants you 10 to 25% damage reduction for 5 seconds. Okay, wow, that's a pretty nice DR bonus for casting conjuration skills. Abundant energy, chance to chain an additional enemy increased to 35 to 50%. Snow Guard's aspect damage reduction increased from 10 to 25% to 15 to 30%. Okay, wow. Of Singed Extremities, now both immobilize and stun, trigger the slow effect. Of Conflagration, while channeling Incinerate, your burning skill damage is increased by 25 to 40%. Now, while channeling Incinerate, your burning damage is increased by 25 to 40%. And enemies hit by Incinerate explode, burning all enemies for over 6 seconds. This effect occurs once per 3 seconds. So they added an AoE damage to Incinerate. To be honest with you, Incinerate doesn't really have too much of an issue with AoE damage. I hate to say this. Its main issue is actually its single target damage output, which seems to be suffering. This is really going to add a large amount of AoE damage to it, which is going to make it even better in the AoE category. But that's not really the problem with Incinerate. When you're fighting bosses and stuff like that, and you try Incinerate killing them, it's a little rough. You just kind of have to like stand there and hold the button down for a really long time to dish out any significant damage. Of Splintering Energy, previous Lightning Spear has a 35 to 50% chance to spawn an additional spear when you cast it. Now, casting Lightning Spear always spawns an additional Lightning Spear, and increases your damage with lightning skills by 10 to 25% for 3 seconds. Okay. So free lightning spears and a bonus damage to your lightning damage. That's pretty impressive. Shattered. Enemies no longer need to die while frozen to trigger the bonus damage. Damage increased from 25 to 40% to 30 to 45%. Unique item, Staff of Lama Sem. Damage to close enemies replaced with ranks of Charged Bolt. Paragon Tactician Glyph. New functionality, now lasts 4 seconds longer for each defensive skill not on your action bar. Winter Glyph, cold damage maximum increased from 15 to 18%. Loot updates. All items dropped in World Tier 3 will now be sacred. All items dropped in World Tier 4 will now be ancestral. Item rarity drop chances have been adjusted. After level 28, the majority, 80% of gear drop that is not legendary, will be rare. Additionally, chances to drop legendary items now scale more after reaching level 50. Item power now increases every 5 levels after 50 instead of on a linear scale. This is to give players time to focus on their affixes before the power of gear increases again. Elixir updates. Looks like they are all weak, strong, and potent elixirs have been removed and replaced with the following more powerful versions, which are available at level 50. Okay. So they basically just condensed down all the elixirs into more powerful versions. I mean, honestly, there was a trillion elixirs in the game, and I really didn't, honestly, much appreciate most of it. New elixirs, elixirs of holy bolts. After killing an enemy, holy bolts fire from the corpse of that enemy. Experience gained 6%. That's kind of cool. Elixir of momentum. After killing an enemy, increase movement speed by 3% for 5 seconds. This effect stacks up to 15 times. User interface and user experience. Asu's heirloom now denotes the critical strike chance based on movement speed in the item's tooltip instead of as a buff on the buff bar. A new option for camera zoom further out has been added into the graphics option on the settings menu. So that's going to be a big thing. Everybody's been waiting on the zoom out. Crafting materials now have rarities associated with them. New notifications related to expiration of migrated seasonal stashes has been added. Search through your stash now supports filtering by item power. Drop item can now be used when selecting control click on the keyboard. The skill tree can now be navigated with the D-pad on the controller. There is now a pop-up on the HUD when picking up materials. Miscellaneous changes made to improve overall readability through the game. Trials. Players who earned a Seal of Worthy for the given week in the Gauntlet now have a 100% chance of being rewarded a unique item. Mutterlock chests now additionally drop 500 obols. Nightmare Dungeon rotation has changed. So the next season, that's World Tier 3. So this is the rotation for World Tier 4 for the next season. If you're wondering what that means, it's just when you go into the Nightmare Dungeons, like which ones can potentially actually be Nightmare Dungeons. These are the ones that can be Nightmare Dungeons. I mean, there's some good ones in here. Blind Burrows is pretty crazy. I'm just looking at kind of like the ones that kind of stand out to me. Some of these are okay. Alderwood is not bad. Miscellaneous traversal skills such as leap and teleport can now have their distance determined by how far the analog stick and controller is deflected. This will enable players on controller to have a better control of the range of those abilities, improving parity with mouse and keyboard play. More skills will now appear more visually powerful as the skill gains power. Additionally, existing visuals scaling has been improved. Experience rewards from completing dungeon events has been increased. Damage over time effects will no longer interrupt channeling skills. Channel times for interactable objects such as picking up bloodstones or activating switches has been adjusted from the previous times of 1 to 2 seconds down to 0.75 seconds. Legendary items and unique items can now be traded. This only includes unaltered items. In fact, if you imprint, enchant, temper, or masterwork an item, it will bind it to your account. So basically, you can now trade pretty much everything with the exception of Uber Uniques. They did confirm this, is that Uber Uniques will not be tradable. But legendary items and unique items can now be traded, which is a pretty big win across the board. Bug fixes. Accessibility, fixed an issue where the screen reader did not identify check marks in the challenge menu. Fixed an issue where the screen reader did not announce various pieces of information in the clan menu. Fixed an issue where the screen reader did not announce stats, skills used to text in the Hall of Fallen Heroes. Fixed an issue where the screen reader did not announce currency types in the character panel. Fixed an issue where the screen reader did not announce anything in the stash search input field. Fixed an issue where the screen reader did not identify the text in the party invitation or quest pop-up. Fixed an issue where the screen reader could malfunction when switching tabs in the renown page. Gameplay, Barbarian. Fixed an issue where Ironskin did not benefit from the bonus barrier generation sources. Fixed an issue where Upheaval, cast by Madoc with the Call of Ancients, would not stun with the Supreme upgrade enabled. Fixed an issue where the tooltip for the aspect of Ancestral Charge did not denote that the damage bonus is multiplicative. Fixed an issue where the Rumble glyph did not fully give bonus damage to all Earthquake effects. Well, that's sad, because I ran an Earthquake Druid in Season 3. Barbarian. Fixed an issue where some non-skill damage effects, such as Metamorphosis or Goer's Devastating Grips, could grant stacks of Furious Upheaval. And fixed an issue where the aspect of Ancestral Charge Legendary could occasionally stop functioning properly. Druid fixed an issue where bonus damage from Wild Impulses passives was additive instead of multiplicative. Fixed an issue where Hurricane was not displaying decimal values for its duration when affected by Endless Tempest passive. Fix an issue where the damage bonus from Aspect of Retaliation bonus could apply twice. Fix an issue where Storm Strike and Claw could attack in place of attempting to path the player. Fix an issue where Blood Howl would not heal the player or properly regenerate spirit when equipped with the Night Howler's aspect. Fix an issue where Fortifies. I always kind of had that hunch that like Night Howlers was making Blood Howl worse in some way, and I guess that confirms it. Fix an issue where the Fortify value is generated by Safeguard was using base life instead of maximum life. Fix an issue where the multiplicative damage from Wild Glyphs did apply for passive attacks from companions. Necromancer. Fix an issue where the bonus from Bone Graft Legendary Paragon node which should only trigger from damage, could be triggered when enemies were made vulnerable by enhanced Bone Prison. Fix an issue where the bonus movement speed from Death's Approach was not active while in town. Fix an issue where the Requiem aspect was granting lower maximum essence per minion than intended. Fix an issue where a Golem attack initiated right after dismounting wouldn't complete. Rogue fixed an issue where Enhanced Shadow Imbuement always granted extra critical strike chance instead of just on injured targets. Fixed an issue where the tooltip for Chilling Weight passive did not denote increased chilling amount for the next rank up tooltip. Fixed an issue where Shadow Clones weren't inheriting ultimate skill damage from the No Witness Legendary Paragon node. Fixed an issue where Thorn's damage could apply Skyhunter's critical strike effect. Fixed an issue where the glyph upgrade pedestal could spawn directly on top of a player in a Nightmare dungeon was completed while casting Barrage. Sorcerer fixed an issue where the bonus damage from Torch and Tactician glyphs were additive instead of multiplicative. Fixed an issue where the Frigid Breeze passive would activate on any type of damage instead of just cold damage. Fixed an issue where Asus Ferocity was applying increased critical strike damage to all types of damage instead of just fire damage. Fixed an issue where Frozen Orb was applying vulnerable to frozen enemies without the Greater Frozen Orb upgrade. Fixed an issue where Destructive Ice Shards vulnerable effect could be applied by free Ice Shards granted by the Ice Shards enchantment. Fixed an issue where the effect from Aspect of Searing Winds could be consumed by free casts granted by the Firewall enchantment. Fix an issue where other players in the party could trigger the Fireball enchantment effect when far away from the Sorcerer. Fix an issue where the damage bonus for the Winterglyph was additive and not multiplicative. The tooltip of the aspect of the Engulfing Flames now properly describe that it can grant both effects simultaneously. Fix an issue where the mana reduction from efficiency aspect only benefited Incinerate for the first second of the channeling ability. Fix an issue where additional ice shards from the aspect of Piercing Cold were dealing more damage than intended. Fix an issue where frozen orbs fired from the enchantment effect did not prioritize targeting enemies on screen. Fix an issue where players' defensive capability could prevent Fortify from being applied. I've actually had that happen before. Fix an issue where a monster with both affixes active could pull the player to the new teleporter location with the Vortex ability. Fixed an issue where the animation for Echo of Lilith's death from above attack didn't sync up with the actual area of effect for the damage. No surprise there. Fixed an issue where players could be damaged while using a traversal. Fixed an issue where the damage bonus from the conceded aspect did not get applied by the barrier granted by Soulbrand. That explains some things. I actually tried out Soulbrand for a little while and I was really unimpressed. And if that's the case, I was missing out on a pretty big damage buff there. Fix an issue where sometimes enemies would not be immobilized when they should be. Fix an issue where aberrant cinders would remain on the ground after HellTide had ended. Fix an issue where the player could be unable to move freely when changing the world tier and using a town portal at the same time. Fix an issue where attack speed magic Paragon nodes granted less attack speed than the tooltip stated. The value now matches the tooltip. Fix an issue where the unstoppable effect from the eluding aspect could trigger when the player was higher than 35% life. Quests and dungeons. Fix an issue where the drowned sea hag in the Mariner's Refuge could not drop loot. Fix an issue where the uncorrupted flesh could not spawn during the perceived threat quest. Fix an issue where the town portal after killing Demothoth during the Depths of Despair quest could block progression. User interface and user experience. Fix an issue where the affix preview window at the occultist showed a fixed value instead of a range of values. Fixed an issue where the key would not display in the key binding menu if F8 was set as a binding. Fixed an issue where the tooltip for X-Fal's corroded signet implied a larger area of effect than the ring actually did damage in. For controller players that attempted to move and cast an ability but lacked the resource for that ability, you will continue to move in that direction until you have enough of your class's resource, at which point you will stop and cast the ability. This has been fixed so that the player will stop moving even if they don't have enough resources to cast. This was a bug that basically was being utilized by controller players to be able to move and cast at the same time, and it was something that PC players basically couldn't replicate. I ran into a rogue in PvP that was exploiting this to no end. It was actually pretty crazy, to be perfectly honest. I guess we'll see how that affects things. Fixed an issue where the damage reduction from Harlequin's Crest didn't display in the character stats while in town or mounted. Fixed an issue where swapping keybinding presets wouldn't persist between play sessions if that was the only setting changed. Fixed an issue where the Edgemaster's aspect could sometimes not appear when searching for the stash. I had that happen to me a couple times. Fixed an issue where the Glacial Aspects tooltips in the Codex of Power wasn't accurate. Fixed an issue where the unequipping a Paragon board that has 2 unlocked gate nodes not connected to each other would result in other boards becoming unequipped. Fixed an issue where powers on items that scaled with players' attributes, such as powers of the Deathless Visage or Flesh Render, did not properly display the scaling bonus. Miscellaneous. Fixed various instances where some items were class restricted when they shouldn't be. Fixed an issue where ancestral items could only be gambled for when the player character was level 73 or higher. Various performance stability and visual UI fixes. All right, so we finally finished going over these notes. It's only been 2 hours and 41 minutes. But let's talk about some of these notes real quick, and I will just try and go over them as quickly as I can here. Good Lord, these notes are ridiculous. The new unique items seem rather neat. Tyrael's Might, Yen's Blessing. There's quite a few unique items in here that are rather interesting, and it's neat. They did zoom out the screen, people of will. That was in the notes. It's an option that you can do. Lil Van Live. I don't really see why it would be considered bad. I mean, that would just be you reading into things. I mean, anything can be considered bad if you put enough thought into it, I suppose. I don't really understand exactly the question, to be honest. Barbarian. So there's some interesting effects here. They seem to be buffing up the ancients, the summoned ancients. So that's like a whole thing, is the summoning ancients. They also seem to be do a lot of buffing up to double swing. So double swing could be very interesting this season. And on top of that, they're doing a lot of buffing it to the dust devils and the castable effects. So anything that has to do with like casting the dust devils, like earthquakes on hit, like stuff like that, they seem to be buffing up a lot of it. They're also changing a lot of the shout aspects to also affect the werewolf and the werebear shouts, which is also kind of interesting. And this new unique ring that's for landslide also seems really interesting as well, especially when you consider a lot of the previous landslide changes. This could be absolutely amazing in terms of damage output. I'm not sure if I want to make another landslide druid, but this is really tempting me to give it another try. The Wildheart boots here, the ones that give you the bonus increased damage while you shapeshifting skills, stacking up to 20 times. I mean, they sound pretty OP for boots. You don't really get a lot of good aspects on boots, and it's a pretty decent amount of damage increase. But you have to shapeshift into a werewolf or a werebear to gain the effect. And you can, of course, stack it 1.5% up to 20 times, which is what? The hell is that? Like 10, 20, like 20 point... I don't even know. My quick math is terrible. Let's just pull out a calculator here so I can not look like an idiot. So 1.5 times 20 is a 30% damage bump. So you get a nice little 30% damage bump with these boots, which is kind of interesting. Necromancer, they seem to be focusing on a couple things. First off, they focused on shadow damage attacks like Decompose and some other stuff like that. They also added a new Blight unique item, which is pretty interesting. And then there's also a new unique item for the Blood Surge ability, which does look pretty powerful as well. They did spend a lot of time, though, working on the minions and beefing up the minions and doing a lot of things with the minions, like increasing the amount of stats that they get from you by 100%, and in general, just making the minions stronger across the board. There are a couple nerfs in there to the minions too, but for the most part, it looks like the season of the Minion Necromancer might be back. And if you're one of those people that really likes the Minion Necromancers, looks like this might be the season to really give the Minion Necromancers a try. I know I've said that in the past, but this time it looks kind of ridiculous. The Rogue, they gave a lot of additional healing to the Rogue, as well as a new rapid fire unique, which gives them explosive arrows. And they also seem to be focusing a lot on beefing up the grenades, which is rather interesting. They're spending a lot of effort on the grenades, increasing the stun length on them to 1 second, increasing the damage. They went over the process of increasing all the aspects that increase the grenades. They also changed the one of the aspects of the Crowded Sage into a heal when you dodge, which is a big boof for the rogues and basically are going to allow them to full heal like all the time, depending on what aspects they choose, because there's a lot of different aspects that apply 100% dodge chance under certain conditions, which is going to full heal them basically every single time they use them. The Sorceress, they've done a lot of work with Frozen Orb, it looks like, this season, and the Conjurations. They're really trying to make the Conjurations useful. And one of the aspects that they added, the Fractured Winter Glass, basically makes it so that your Conjurations can fire random Frozen Orbs, which is kind of insane. And it looks like Frozen Orb is going to be pretty powerful this season. If you were interested in making a Frozen Orb Sorceress but never did, or maybe you tried it and you failed, it looks like this is the season to make a Frozen Orb Sorceress in. There's also this really crazy thing with the Firebolt skill, which looks like you could potentially make a Firebolt basic skill sorceress, which I don't know if it would actually work, but it does sound pretty crazy, and worth at least testing. A lot of the changes that they made to the Sorceress also made the Sorceress more tanky. Not less tanky, but more tanky, which was also kind of interesting. They did nerf Banished Lord's Talisman, and they nerfed Tybalt's Will. They also nerfed Barbarian's Hoda pretty heavily as well. Disobedience got fixed completely, basically, but also at the same time, it's still pretty much just been completely kind of overshadowed by the new Juggernaut aspect. So fixing Disobedience, I don't know if it's actually going to have much of an effect on the game. Now, granted, the new pit goes up to tier 200, and you might need more defense going up to 200, because if you're only level 100 and you're fighting level 200 monsters, the monsters are going to be that much more ridiculous, and they're going to one-shot you all the time if your defense is too low. So who knows, you might have to run Disobedience and Juggernaut now. They changed a lot of the aspects in here for the better, some of them for the worse, in my opinion, but it really kind of depends on the aspect. I went over everything in detail here, but a lot of them are just little tiny changes to try and make them better. Some of them are overall nerfs, like Intercom got nerfed by about 10%. They are making all of the shout aspects usable by both the druids and the barbarians, which I'm not really entirely enthused about this, because I don't like being stuck using like 4 or 5 aspects to make one particular thing better. But I mean, it's nice that the druids are being included in the shout stuff. I just really wish they would condense down some of these aspects so that you're not having to run 4 or 5 aspects just to get one thing working properly. Somebody made a joke the other day. They were like Diablo 3 sets are in Diablo 4, and I'm like, no, they're not. And they're like, yeah, they are, because you pretty much have to use like 4 or 5 different aspects just to make one skill worthwhile, which in effect is pretty much the same thing as being forced to wear a set. And you know what? They're kind of right, because when you get to the point where you have to literally put on like 5 aspects to make something work, you're pretty much in the set territory at that point. Needle Flare being applied to Necromancer minions was huge. That is huge. I'm gonna just take the H off and just the huge. That's ridiculous. And it's going to make the Needle Flare aspect just absolutely insane. Thorn's Necromancer. Thorn's Necromancer is probably going to be a thing this season. And it's going to be powerful. Really powerful. This right here was a really big change. I was talking about that earlier. Necromancer, Barbarian, Druid, Sorcerer's Companions now receive 100% of players' attributes. This is going to be absolutely ridiculous for just about everybody who is running any kind of companion build, because it's going to make your companions actually be useful. They're going to get all of your crit chance. They're going to get all of your damage reduction. They're going to get all of your attack speed bonuses and so forth and so on. And they're actually going to dish out damage, unlike they were doing previously. All Druid and Barbarian skills are now tagged as shouts. That's the whole thing that they're changing with that, which is interesting. They're also doing this whole thing with mobility skills being tagged as mobility skills. So everything that is a mobility skill will now be tagged as a mobility skill. And then on top of that, they're also making sure that anything that even remotely counts as a core skill, so like they're tagging things that were not core skills before that are going to be considered core skills now. Like Bone Spirit is now going to be considered a core skill. Blizzard is now going to be considered a core skill. Boulder is going to be considered a core skill, and so forth and so on. So basically, you're going to have a much more broader way of building your characters, since those skills are also going to be considered core skills. They removed the damage reduction from Barbarian, so that's they're going to be a little bit easier to kill now. On top of that, they pretty severely nerfed Hoda into the dust. I'm not going to say 100% for sure that they did it this time, because they keep trying to nerf it and they keep failing. But they took away the Hammer of the Ancients 1% increased damage for each point of fury you have, which is probably the biggest nerf that they could have done. And I'm not even sure Hoda is even going to be worth using at this point, so I guess we'll find out. Tons of changes and increases to the way that Dust Devils and things like that work. They also talked about this during the campfire, that basically they would scale based on your weapon now, so they're going to scale in damage. And they also nerfed charge as well from 250 to 180%. They seem to be beefing up Call the Ancients quite considerably across the board, including a new unique item. They also beefed up Kick, which was pretty impressive. Kick looks like it's going to be even more powerful than it was before. And honestly, it was already pretty powerful. The trying to see if I can remember. They're playing around with some of the weapon expertises too. Some of them they made better, some of them they made worse. I'm not really sure what to think about some of these. They also nerfed pretty heavily the Blood Rage bonus that everybody was using with Berserk. So for those of you who had been using the Blood Rage bonus to get your additional damage multiplier through the Berserking bonus, well, they nerfed it and they capped it at 30% too. So it's nowhere near as powerful as it was before. I'm trying to think here if there's anything else really in here. They also kind of fixed the double swing stuff, so that double swing is more attractive. They did a lot of work in double swing. The Dust Devils, the double swing itself, the casting of the Dust Devils with double swing, as well as the Dust Devils that come from other things like the Whirlwind Dust Devils and whatnot. They played a lot around with that. The I'm trying to think here if there's anything else. This was a pretty big change right here. The anemia aspect that basically allows the stun to occur on any damage instead of just direct damage. This is a pretty big change. From what I understand, this is going to change it so that the stun is going to happen more often. And if you're using the Skullbreakers aspect, you're going to get more damage pumps from every single time the monsters get stunned, which is going to be pretty ridiculous. So this is going to be a huge change for the Bleeding Barbarians, because it's going to give you a lot of additional damage than you had previously. They also changed the shouts to be more generic. Because obviously they have to work for the Barbarian too, so they've changed things like Fury per second to Primary Resource per second, and they also changed it from 2 to 4 to 5 to 10. Rage of Haragroth got a nice change to be less specific, so it no longer is just on elites, now it's on all monsters, which is a very good change for Rage of Haragoth because it does Haragath, which makes it less specific. Azure Wrath also became less specific and triggers on non-core skills. It's going to be a pretty powerful weapon in the coming patches. And the Fields of Crimson bonus now applies to all damage type instead of just bleeding damage, which is pretty powerful as well. Druids got some pretty interesting changes to the minions. They got increases. Claw got an increase. Maul got an increase. Maul got a new item that pretty much turns it into Frenzy, which is absolutely insane. And Shred also got a buff, as well as Debilitating Roar got turned into a Shout skill. Now, oddly enough, the other Shout didn't get turned into a Shout skill. Instead, you have to use an aspect to turn it into a Shout skill. The wolves getting unstoppable when you cast their skill is actually pretty nice because it does prevent them from getting locked down while they're using their active skill. Petrify got a nice little buff as well, which is not terrible. And Lacerate got buffed up extremely, but it's still Lacerate, and I'm not really sure how well that's actually going to work out. The minions got a buff with a nice little buff to Call the Wild, which is a 12% increase per point, which is a total of 246, 6% increase. And of course, you can also get an additional plus to skill on the amulet, which is going to get you even further. So another 246, which is a 12% increase total to the minion's damage. This was a big L in my opinion, a very big loss. The Clarity skill, which lets you gain 2 spirit when transforming into human form, was an absolutely excellent ability on the Druid tree, and I absolutely loved putting 3 points into it because you gained a 6 spirit when every time you transformed into a human form, and it was very useful with the companion skills and some of the defensive skills, which turned you back into a human whenever you were utilizing those skills. And that is now gone. And in its place, they basically made it so that you get, after casting a companion skill, your next core or wraith skill damage, criticals chance are increased by 5 to 15%. I'm not really too. I don't really like I'm not against this particular effect. I just wish that they hadn't removed Clarity, which was a very effective ability on that character. They could have taken this effect and they could have put it with Call of the Wild, which would have been perfectly fine. But I don't like them removing this one. I don't like it at all. They increased the movement speed on Digigrade. I got like a beard hair growing in my nose here. I also really don't like this change of taking away the ability to dish out your poison damage as direct damage. They took this away entirely and turned it into a damage buff while hitting a poisoned enemy, which I'm not entirely sure that I like that. I mean, it's a buff for some characters, but a nerf for other characters. Let's see here. This is the one that I was talking about. I don't really like this one because you have to use the Night Howler's aspect to turn it into a shout skill to get access to the other Barbarian shout skill aspects that have been converted over to the Druid, which means you need a lot of aspects to be able to actually utilize this. I kind of wish that they would just take this whole aspect and just condense it down into the Bloodhowl skill itself, because this aspect just kind of feels out of place and not needed. It's just one extra aspect that I've got to throw on a character that's going to take the place of another aspect that I actually need. And I just don't really like the fact that you have to use this to get the shout bonuses with that particular effect. This one right here is also kind of nice. It basically takes the Shepherd's aspect and lets it apply to the Wraith skills, which is a pretty big bonus. They also have made it so that Flesh Render works on any defensive skill instead of just Debilitating Roar Bloodhowl, which means that Flesh Render is now even more powerful than it was before. Although it's not the most amazing thing in the world, I was utilizing it quite successfully in one season to basically spam Bloodhowl and Debilitating Roar. But the funny thing is that now that they've changed it to any defensive skill, that same build that I had before would be even more ridiculous because I'd be getting the poison damage on any defensive skill, and I was able to spam all 4 defensive skills, which was pretty crazy. Tracker Glyph got a little buff, and so did Bane, which was pretty nice. And trying to think here. Here's the Necromancer changes. You can see they beefed up Blight a little bit. They removed the speed from Blood Mist entirely. A lot of people are going to like that. They also gave Necromancers an Unstoppable, which was really good. This is the first Unstoppable the Necromancers have basically had the entire time the game's been launched. They've massively have beefed up Decompose, but I'm still worried that because Decompose is a channeling skill that makes you stand still, it's going to be an issue. Army of the Dead has been beefed up quite a bit by having more skeletons spawn, which is going to mean more corpses, which is going to mean a pretty interesting skill all around. It's also categorized as a summoning skill now, which means it probably gets summoning skill bonuses. This one, I think, was a nerf overall because of the way that they kind of gutted this. They basically changed the passive that gave your minions a multiplier based on their attack speed to a lower percentage, and then now they've also removed a lot of attack speed from the Necromancer so that you can have less attack speed, and turned it into something that you really didn't need, which was Critical Strike, so it's kind of a nerf overall, unfortunately. This one right here, which is after you've not taken damage, your minions gain 15% increased attack speed. The bonus is doubled when you have at least 7 minions, which is 30%. 3%, you can potentially hit higher if you can get your full active minions running than the 30% that it was giving you. I think it's like 36% total if you have like the full Monty of minions. So not much of a change here. Just giving you a bonus for each active minion, which is not bad. I mean, I think it's actually objectively better by a small percentage if you're running maximum minions. They made a lot of changes to the minions themselves, like giving you the ability to, and obviously have 100% of their stats. And one of the things that they had to do was take away a lot of these thorns things. So the thorns things are no longer needed because your minions are already receiving 100% of your stats. So all that stuff had to be taken away, and they had to replace it with other things. And they actually did some pretty nice ones in here, like the reduction of cooldowns. They also gave a taunt to the defenders. They made it so that they take 99% less damage. The Shadow Mages are pretty neat. They can actually imbue, apparently, your skeletons with your damage, and the attacks pierce, which is pretty cool. Your Bone Mages can actually fire off Bone Splinters and Bone Spears, apparently, if you have them equipped. There's also some other interesting things like adding in the fortification, which is pretty nice. They're trying to remember all of these off the top of my head. The Bone Golem can basically spawn 5 corpses now, which is pretty nice. So you can basically just hit the button, he spawns 5 corpses, which is going to make him extremely useful for that. The Bone Golem can also spawn bone spikes when taking damage, which is really interesting. They massively increased the damage of Shockwave on the Iron Golem and also made it so that he can pull in, which is really interesting. So you're gonna have a pull in with the Iron Golem too if you want it. All in all, everything seems to be a buff for the minions, except for when I got to the stuff revolving around the attack speed bonuses. So, like, they basically removed the attack speed from the unyielding commander, but then gave it damage instead. And then they did the same thing with the final ability, which allows you to get your attack speed, which is right here. And they nerfed it pretty heavily from, like, a total of, say, like, almost 300% multiplier to down to, like, 150% multiplier. It's a lot less than what you would have gotten previous had you a stacked attack speed. But at the same time, they've also increased the damage of the minions significantly in the process, so it's kind of hard to get a good feeling for what's going on. I've said before is that we're going to have to play PTR to get a full feeling for all these changes, and it's pretty clear. They also made it so that the Skeletal Warriors are just passively 2 higher if you're using the Occult Dominion, which is really nice, but they also took away 2 from the Blood Getters, which is fine as long as, you're not losing 2 total, so you just get 2 total here with the Occult Dominion aspect. I think that's pretty much it on the Necromancer, except for the Ring of Meldeln, which looks like it got a pretty hefty buff. of every sixth attack it's going to explode instead of a 10% lucky hit chance. So it's actually much better now because it's a guaranteed every sixth hit they're going to dish out damage. And of course, you can increase the speed of this by increasing the speed of your minions, which of course means that they attack faster and you get more explosions. Overall, the Necromancer changes look good. The Rogue got, like I said, grenade increases. There was definitely some odd increases. They seem to be buffing up Flurry. They did some minor fixes to Victimize. I mean, I'm not really going to say that the Rogue changed like drastically. They seem to be focusing on grenade skills a lot. They also got several really big heals in the process that they can utilize. They definitely are going to become tankier in the regard of being able to heal themselves, which is interesting, as well as a couple skills were given some pretty crazy abilities to freeze targets. Like this one is basically the same as your critical strike chance to freeze enemies for 2 seconds. So you're basically they've given you like a free freeze. Most rogues have pretty high critical strike chance already, and so you should be sitting somewhere around like 50 to 100% critical strike chance, which is going to give you a 51 to 100% critical or chance to freeze all the enemies for 2 seconds, which is kind of neat. This one was pretty cool, the ability to apply shadow imbuement through the of volatile shadows. This is a relatively unused aspect that nobody really cared about, and now it's turned into something that actually looks kind of cool. The ability to apply shadow imbuement to people when the Dark Shroud effect ends means that you could potentially dish out a large amount of damage through that, which is interesting. Still a lot of stuff, like this is one of the heals that they added. In combination with the of the crowded shade. I'm really not sure what the hell's going on with these. They added a whole bunch of additional arrow storms and additional damage with the arrow storms, I guess, to try and make the arrow storms better. But then they kept the cap at 5, which is kind of weird. I mean, why add an additional aspect that makes more arrow storms if you're just going to keep the cap at 5? I guess the reason is because they have the damage bonuses here, and you could stack both and get an 80% increase in damage of your arrow storms, but then at the same time, you've got to burn 2 aspect slots to get access to those 2 different arrow storms that are not going to stack because you can still only have 5 maximum. It just seems a little odd. Sorceress, they did a lot of buffs to the Frost Nova. Frost Nova is, or not Frost Nova, sorry. Frozen Orb and Frost Nova both got some changes, but Frozen Orb has definitely seen the most. It looks like they're focusing on Frozen Orb this season. No longer able to protect yourself with Flame Shield, and Mastery skills are now considered core skills, which is also pretty neat. They also removed a lot of the mana regeneration, like stuff from the armors. I'm not really sure why. Like they took away the Flame Shields mana cost reduction, and then they took away the Frozen Orb mana increase. Yeah, where's that? Or the Frost Nova mana increase, and they replaced it with something kind of crappy, in my opinion. They also added some pretty interesting things in here with the teleport, which allows you to basically like spam a teleport and get crackling energies. It sounds like there's an Oculus build in there. I was talking about that earlier. They definitely have done some changes, like Hydras are now increased from 1 to 2. They made it so that the Lightning Spear aspect always summons an additional Lightning Spear and also gives you additional lightning damage. Overall, the changes to the Sorceress look kind of good. There's a couple bad ones in here, but for the most part, it doesn't seem terrible. Some damage reduction increases as well from the Snow Guards aspect and a couple other places. They also put some damage reduction on Incinerate, and they gave it Incinerate the ability to just split into 3 different things. I'm not entirely sure, but Incinerate looks kind of interesting too this season. Sacred items will now only drop in World Tier 3, and Ancestral items will only drop in World Tier 4. And they also talked about basically like condensing all the elixirs. In the dev chat, they also talked about condensing all the crafting materials too, so that they're less complicated, which is interesting. I mean, it's nice to condense down a lot of the craziness. They also added 2 new elixirs, the Momentum and the Holy Bolt elixir. They both look kind of neat. The Holy Bolt one looks actually really interesting, to be honest. Fixes, they seem to do a lot of fixes across the board when it came to that's the new rotation for season 4. If you guys are interested in that. And a lot of the fixes they did, like for instance, they changed it so that leap and teleport can now have their distance controlled by controllers. They did make it so that you can zoom out. Zooming out now is a thing. Where is the other stuff in here? By the way, the zoom out thing is in the settings, and it's probably not going to be enabled by default, so it's probably going to be a whole thing that I'm going to have to like walk people through on a regular basis. But it might be something I make a video for, like you can zoom out now, and then like it'll be like a 30-second video of me showing you how to zoom out the camera. A lot of the bug fixes seem pretty benign. Like there wasn't a whole lot of crazy stuff in here. Some things that needed to be fixed. I didn't see anything that struck out at me too much as a like crazy fix. I'm trying to remember, like, you know, just like go back through and refresh my memory, but um yeah, I mean, a lot of these fixes are good. There's just nothing in here that was like, you know, hidden doojanks that made me be like, oh my God, I can't believe they did this. This is just absolutely crazy. Why would they do this? They were all generally very useful and very good changes that needed to be made. Some of them kind of surprised me, like this one that said that the rumble glyph wasn't affecting the earthquake skills. I'm really pissed when I keep reading this stuff because they'll tell you to go play like X character because they made this new aspect, and then you go play X character, and then the next season they're like, oh yeah, you know that character that we told you to play last season? Well, it didn't work. We fixed it though, but you know, it didn't work last season. Thanks for playing that character that we wanted you to play last season, but it didn't work last season. So we're sorry about that, but we did fix it. We did fix it, guys. Though we did get on that as soon as we could. um, where's the line? The zoom. Where's the zoom line? There's a zoom line in here. Okay, zoom. Let's type in zoom. Zoom. See, look, a new option for the camera to zoom further out has been added in the graphics options setting menu. Yay. Yay. I think that's pretty much it. We've gone over the patch notes. I mean, it took like 3 hours to go over these patch notes. There's definitely a lot of freaking information here. I really feel like we're not going to know what the game is like until we get into public test realm and we actually test it. I will be on tomorrow to test it. I do have to work tomorrow, unfortunately, night shift, but I'm going to be on as long as I can to test out public test realm with you guys. And, we'll find out whether this is objectively a good patch or whether it's objectively a bad patch. I mean, is it changed for the better or is it changed for the worse? I mean, a lot of these changes seem good. But then again, we also have the greater rift that is going to complicate things. If you guys don't know how the greater rift is going to complicate things, I mean, I'm not really sure how to explain it to you other than it's going to make it more difficult for you to create the build that you want to create, if that makes sense. So in the previous version of Diablo 4, you could probably log in, create whatever character you wanted to create, whatever build you wanted to create, and you could just have fun with it. You didn't have to look up a meta build. You didn't have to look up a guide. You could just have fun making your characters the way you wanted to make them. But unfortunately, I think the pit is pretty much going to create a situation where you are not going to be able to do whatever you want anymore. The way that the monsters are going to scale all the way up to level 200 and the amount of difficulty that's going to be created from this is going to condense down the number of playable builds to a handful. And unfortunately, I think at a certain point, it's not going to be apparent right now. Like, I can't give you a list of the builds that are currently going to be able to do the content, but it will show itself relatively quickly. You will be playing the game, and you will see that, like, for instance, like last season, where everybody was a Hoda Barbarian, and everybody was a Ball Lightning Sorceress, and everybody was a, like a Shred Druid, etc. Like, and those were the 3 builds that everybody was playing. Like, it's going to get to that point in Diablo 4 with the pit, because the difficulty of the pit is going to continue to scale to the point where only a certain handful of builds are actually going to be able to do the content. And while I do think that these patch notes are good, I think that a lot of the changes that they've made in these patch notes are good. But if these characters can't handle that content, like, for instance, they have a whole frozen orb sorceress here, right? That they have plotted out, a new unique item, and all this other stuff, right? Well, if the frozen orb sorceress can't handle the new content, then nobody's going to play it. If the minion necromancer can't handle the new content, then all the changes that you're making for the minion necromancer are going to be for naught, and nobody's going to play the minion necromancer in the new content because he can't handle it. And so I think that we have to take all of these patch notes with a grain of salt, because what it comes down to is this literally going to ruin all of the changes that they're making? Because if the characters that they're making, if all the changes that they're making don't make these characters viable in this content, and this content is required to proceed through the game, then you might be in a situation where you're forced to drop the characters that you want to play and the builds that you want to play to pick up characters that can actually complete this content. Anyway, I think I'm pretty much done. 3 hours and 15 minutes. I'm starving, and I think I'm going to go get something to eat. I will see you guys tomorrow for Public Test Realm. We'll have some fun testing all this stuff out and see how all of it works. And I'm definitely going to be testing out the Minion Necromancer tomorrow, and I really want to check out the Frozen Orb Sorceress with the Conjurations. And if possible, I may also check out these Druid Shouts. They also sound kind of interesting. Anyway, as always, I do appreciate you guys and gals joining my videos and participating. And if you enjoy my content, be sure to hit the like button. Be sure to hit the subscribe button. And as always, keep watching.